Chapter 14. Best of Enemies. Tap, tap, not now, stormed Colonel Glokta. I have all these to get through. There must have been 10,000 papers of confession for him to sign. His desk was groaning with great heaps of them, and the nib of his pen was soft as butter. What with the red ink, his marks looked like dark bloodstains sprayed across the pale paper. Damn it, he raged as he knocked over the bottle with his elbow, splashing ink out over the desk, soaking into the piles of papers, dripping to the floor with a steady tap, 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 tap. There will be time later for you to confess. Ample time. The colonel frowned. The air had grown decidedly chill. You again, always at the worst times. You remember me then. I seemed to, in truth. The colonel was finding it hard to recall from where. It looked like a woman in the corner, but he could not make out her face. The maker fell burning. He broke upon the bridge below. The words were familiar, but Glokta could not have said why. Old stories and nonsense. He winced. Damn it, but his leg hurt. I seemed to... His usual confidence was all ebbing away. The room was icy cold now. He could see his breath smoking before his face. He stumbled up from his chair as his unwelcome visitor came closer, his leg aching with a vengeance. "What do you want?" he managed to croak. The face came into the light. It was none other than Malthus, from the banking house of Valent and Balk, the seed colonel, and he smiled his joyless smile. "I want the seed. Glokta's back found the wall." He could go no further. The seed. Now it was Goyle's face, now Salt's. Now Salt's, now Salt's, now Severod's, but they all made the same demand. The seed. I lose patience. Bayaz, he whispered, squeezing his eyes closed, tears running out from underneath his lids. Bayaz knows. Tap, tap, torturer. The woman's hissing voice again. A fingertip jabbed at the side of his head, painfully hard. If that old liar knew, it would be mine already. No, you will find it. He could not speak for fear. You will find it, or I will tear the price from your twisted flesh. So tap, tap, time to wake. The fingers stabbed at his skull again, digging into the side of his head like a dagger blade. Tap, tap, cripple, hissed the hideous voice in his ear. Breath so cold it seemed to burn his bare cheek. Tap, 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 tap. For a moment Glokta hardly knew where he was. He jerked upright, struggling with the sheets, staring about him, hemmed in on every side by threatening shadows, his own whimpering breath hissing in his head. Then everything fell suddenly into place. My new apartments. A pleasant breeze stirred the curtains in the sticky night, washing through the one open window. Glokta saw its shadow shifting on the rendered wall. It swung shut against the frame, open, then shut again. Tap, tap. He closed his eyes and breathed a long sigh, winced as he sagged back in his bed, stretching his legs out, working his toes against the cramps. Those toes the Gurkish left me, at least. Only another dream. Everything as then he remembered, and his eyes snapped wide open. The king is dead. Tomorrow we elect a new one. The 320 papers were hanged, lifeless, from their nails. They had grown more and more, creased, battered, greasy, and grubby over the past few weeks, as the business itself has slid further into the filth. Many were ink-smudged, covered with angrily scrawled notes, with fillings in and crossings out. As men were bought and sold, bullied and blackmailed, bribed and beguiled. Many were torn where wax had been removed, added, replaced with other colors. As the allegiances shifted, as the promises were broken, as the balance swung this way and that, Archlector Zolt stood glaring at them, like a shepherd at his troublesome flock, his white coat rumpled, his white hair in disarray. Glokta had never before seen him look anything less than perfectly presented. He must at last taste blood, his own. I would almost want to laugh if my own mouth were not so terribly salty. Brock has 75, Salt was hissing to himself, white-gloved hands fussing with each other behind his back. Brock has 75. Isher has 55. Isher has 55. Skald and Berezin, 40 apiece. Brock has 75. He muttered the numbers over and over, as though they were a charm to protect him from evil, or from good, perhaps. Isher has 55. Glokta had to suppress a smile. Brock, then Isher, then Skald and Berezin, while the Inquisition and Judiciary struggle over scraps. For all our efforts, the shape of things is much the same as when we began this ugly dance. We might as well have fled the country then, and saved ourselves the trouble. Perhaps it is still not too late. Glokta noisily cleared his throat and Sult's head jerked round. You have something to contribute? In a manner of speaking, Your Eminence. Glokta kept his tone as servile as he possibly could. I received some rather troubling information recently. Sult scowled, and nodded his head at the papers. More troubling than this, equally, at any rate. After all, whoever wins the vote will have but a brief celebration if the Gurkish arrive and slaughter the lot of us a week later. It has been suggested to me that the Gurkish are preparing to invade Midderland. There was a brief, uncomfortable pause. Scarcely a promising reception, but we have set sail now. What else to do but steer straight for the storm? Invade, sneered Goyle. With what? It is not the first time I have been told they have a fleet, trying desperately to patch my foundering vessel. A considerable fleet, built in secret after the last war. We could easily make some preparations. Then, if the Gurkish do come. And what if you are wrong? The Archlector was frowning mightily. From whom did this information come? Oh dear me, no, that would never do. Carlot Dan Eider, alive? But how? Body found floating by the docks? An anonymous source, Archlector, anonymous? His Eminence glowered through narrowed eyes. And you would have me go to the closed council, at a time like this, and put before them the unproven gossip of your anonymous source. The waves swamp the deck. I merely wish to alert your Eminence to the possibility. When are they coming? The torn sailcloth flaps in the gale. My informant did not. Where will they land? The sailors topple screaming from the rigging. Again, Your Eminence, I cannot. What will be their numbers? Goodwill breaks off in my shaking hands. Glokta winced, and decided not to speak at all. Then kindly refrain from distracting us with rumors, sneered Sult, his lip twisted with contempt. The ship vanishes beneath the merciless waves, her cargo of precious warnings consigned to the deep, and her captain will not be missed. We have more pressing concerns than a legion of Gurkish phantoms. Of course, Your Eminence. And if the Gurkish come, who will we hang? Oh, Superior Glokta, of course. Why ever did that damn cripple not speak up? Sult's mind had already slipped back into its well-worn circles. We have 31 votes, and Morovia has something over 20. 31. Not enough to make the difference. He shook his head grimly, blue eyes darting over the papers. As if there were some new way to look at them that would alter the terrible mathematics. Nowhere near enough, unless we were to come to an understanding with High Justice Morovia. Again, a pause, even more uncomfortable than last time. Oh dear, I must have said that out loud. An understanding, hissed Sult. With Morovia? Squealed Goyle, his eyes bulging with triumph. When the safe options are all exhausted, we must take risks. Is that not what I told myself as I rowed down to the bridge, while the Gurkish massed upon the other side? Ah, well, once more into the tempest, Glokta took a deep breath. Morovia's seat on the closed council is no safer than anyone else. We may have been working against each other, but only out of habit. On the subject of this vote, our aims are the same, to secure a weak candidate and maintain the balance. Together you have more than 50 votes. That might well be enough to tip the scales. Goyle sneered his contempt. Join forces with that peasant-loving hypocrite. Have you lost your reason? Shut up, Goyle. Sult glared at Glokta for a long while, his lips pursed in thought. Considering my punishment, perhaps another tongue lashing? Or a real lashing? Or my body found floating? You are right. Go and speak to Morovia. Go and speak to Morovia. Sandan Glokta, once more the hero. Goyle's jaw hung open. But Your Eminence, the time for pride is far behind us, snarled Sult. We must seize any chance of keeping Brock and the rest from the throne. We must find compromises, however painful, and we must take whatever allies we can. Go! He hissed over his shoulder, folding his arms and turning back to his crackling papers. Strike a deal with Morovia. Glokta got stiffly up from his chair, ashamed to leave such lovely company. But when duty calls, he treated Goyle to the briefest of toothless smiles, then took up his cane and limped for the door. And, Glokta! He winced as he turned back into the room. Morovia's aims and ours may meet for now, but we cannot trust him. Tread carefully. Of course, Your Eminence. I always do. What other choice when every step is agony? The private office of the High Justice was as big as a barn, its ceiling covered in festoons of old molding, riddled with shadows. Although it was only late afternoon, the thick ivy outside the windows and the thick grime on the panes had sunk the place into a perpetual twilight. Tottering heaps of papers were stacked on every surface. Wedges of documents tied with black tape, piles of leather-bound ledgers, stacks of dusty parchments in ostentatious swirling script, stamped with huge seals of red wax and glittering gilt. A kingdom's worth of law, it looked like, and indeed it probably is. Superior Glokta, good evening. Morovia himself was seated at a long table near the empty fireplace, set for dinner, a flickering candelabra making each dish glisten in the gloom. I hope you do not mind if I eat while we talk. I would rather dine in the comfort of my rooms, but I find myself eating here more and more. So much to do, you see, and one of my secretaries appears to have taken a holiday unannounced, a holiday to the slaughterhouse floor, in fact, by way of the intestines of a herd of swine. Would you care to join me? Morovia gestured at a large joint of meat, close to raw in the center, swimming in bloody gravy. Glokta licked at his empty gums as he maneuvered himself into a chair opposite. I would be delighted, your worship, but the laws of dentistry prevent me. Ah, of course. Those laws there can be no circumventing, even by a high justice. You have my sympathy, Superior. One of my greatest pleasures is a good cut of meat, and the bloodier the better. Just show them the flame. I always tell my cook. Just show it to them. Funny. I tell my practicals to start the same way. I tell my practicals to start the same way. And to what do I owe this unexpected visit? Do you come on your own initiative, or at the urging of your employer, my esteemed colleague from the Closed Council, Archlector Salt? Your bitter mortal enemy from the Closed Council, do you mean? His Eminence is aware that I am here, is he? Morovia carved another slice and lifted it dripping onto his plate. And with what message has he sent you? Something relating to tomorrow's business in the open council, perhaps. You spoil my surprise, your worship. May I speak plainly? If you know how. Glokta showed the High Justice his empty grin. This affair with the vote is a terrible thing for business. The doubt, the uncertainty, the worry. Bad for everyone's business. Some more than others. Morovia's knife squealed against the plate as he slid a ribbon of fat from the edge of his meat. Of course, at particular risk are those that sit on the Closed Council, and those that struggle on their behalf. They are unlikely to be given such a free hand if powerful men such as Brock or Isher are voted to the throne. Some of us indeed are unlikely to live out the week. Morovia speared a slice of carrot with his fork and stared sourly at it. A lamentable state of affairs. It would have been preferable for all concerned if Reynald or Ladisla were still alive. He thought about it for a moment. If Reynald were still alive, at least. But the vote will take place tomorrow, however much we might tear our hair. It is hard now to see our way to a remedy. He looked from the carrot to Glokta. Or do you suggest one? You, your worship, control between 20 and 30 votes on the open council. Morovia shrugged. I have some influence, I cannot deny it. The Archlector can call on 30 votes himself. Good for his Eminence. Not necessarily. If the two of you oppose each other, as you always have, your votes will mean nothing. One for Isher, the other for Brock, and no difference made. Morovia sighed. A sad end to our two glittering careers. Unless you were to pool your resources, then you might have 60 votes between you. As many, almost, as Brock controls. Enough to make a king of Skald, or Berezin, or Hugin, or even some unknown, depending on how things go. Someone who might be more easily influenced in the future. Someone who might keep the Closed Council he has rather than selecting a new one. A king to make us all happy, eh? If you were to express a preference for one man or another, I could take that back to his Eminence. More steps, more coaxing, more disappointments. Oh, to have a great office of my own, and to sit all day in comfort while cringing bastards slog up my stairs to smile at my insults, lap up my lies, beg for my poisonous support. Shall I tell you what would make me happy, Superior Glokta? Now for the musings of another power-mad old fart. By all means, your worship. Morovia tossed his cutlery onto his plate, sat back in his chair and gave a long, tired sigh. I would like no king at all. I would like every man equal under the law, to have a say in the running of his own country and the choosing of his own leaders. I would like no king and no nobles, and a closed council selected by and answerable to the citizens themselves. A closed council open to all, you might say. What do you think of that? I think some people would say that it sounds very much like treason. The rest would simply call it madness. I think, your worship, that your notion is a fantasy. Why so? Because the vast majority of men would far rather be told what to do than make their own choices. Obedience is easy. The High Justice laughed. Perhaps you are right, but things will change. This rebellion has convinced me of it. Things will change, by small steps. I am sure Lord Brock on the throne is one small step none of us would like to see taken. Lord Brock does indeed have very strong opinions, mostly relating to himself. You make a convincing case, superior. Morovia sat back in his chair, hands resting on his belly, staring at Glokta through narrowed eyes. Very well. You may tell Archlector Salt that this, once we have common cause. If a neutral candidate with sufficient support presents himself, I will have my votes cast along with his. Who could have thought it? The closed council united. He slowly shook his head. Strange times indeed. They certainly are, your worship. Glokta struggled to his feet, wincing as he put his weight on his burning leg, and shuffled across the gloomy, echoing space, towards the door. Strange, though, that our High Justice is so philosophical on the subject of losing his position tomorrow. I have scarcely ever seen a man look calmer. He paused as he touched the handle of the door. One would almost suppose that he knows something we do not. One might almost suppose that he already has a plan in mind. He turned back. Can I trust you, High Justice? Morovia looked sharply up, the carving knife poised in his hand. What a beautifully quaint question from a man in your line of work. I suppose that you can trust me to act in my own interests, just as far as I can trust you to do the same. Our deal goes no further than that. Nor should it. You are a clever man, superior, you make me smile. And he turned back to his joint of meat, prodding at it with a fork and making the blood run. You should find another master, Glokta shuffled out. A charming suggestion, but I already have two more than I'd like. The prisoner was a scrawny, sinewy specimen, naked and bagged as usual, with hands manacled securely behind his back. Glokta watched as Frost dragged him into the domed room from the cells, his stumbling bare feet flapping against the cold floor. He wasn't too hard to get a hold of, Severid was saying. He left the others a while ago, but he's been hanging round the city like the smell of piss ever since. We picked him up yesterday night. Frost flung the prisoner down in the chair. Where am I? Who has me? What do they want? A horrifying moment, just before the work begins. The terror and the helplessness, the sick tingling of anticipation. My own memory of it was sharply refreshed, only the other day, at the hands of the charming Magister Ida. I was set free unmolested, however. The prisoner sat there, head tilted to one side, the canvas on the front of the bag moving back and forth with his hurried breath. I very much doubt that he will be so lucky. Glokta's eyes crept reluctantly to the painting above the prisoner's bagged head. Our old friend Canedius. The painted face stared grimly down from the domed ceiling. The arms spread wide, the colorful fire behind. The maker fell burning. He weighed the heavy hammer reluctantly in his hand. Let's get on with it then. Severid snatched the canvas bag away with a showy flourish. The navigator squinted into the bright lamplight, a weather-beaten face, tanned and deeply lined, head shaved like a priest, or a confessed traitor, of course. Your name is Brother Longfoot, indeed. Of the noble order of navigators, I assure you that I am innocent of any crime. The words came out in a rush. I have done nothing unlawful, no. That would not be my way at all. I am a law-abiding man and always have been. I can think of no possible reason why I should be manhandled in this way. His eyes swiveled down and he saw the anvil gleaming on the floor between him and Glokta, where the table would usually have been. His voice rose an entire octave higher. "The Order of Navigators is well respected, and I am a member in good standing." "Exceptional standing! Navigation is the foremost of my many remarkable talents. It is indeed the foremost of." Glokta cracked his hammer against the top of the anvil with a clang to wake the dead. "Stop talking!" The little man blinked and gaped, but he shut up. Glokta sank back in his chair, kneading at his withered thigh, the pain prickling up his back. "Do you have any notion of how tired I am? Of how much I have to do? The agony of getting out of bed each morning leaves me a broken man before the day even begins, and the present moment is an exceptionally stressful one. It is therefore a matter of the most supreme indifference to me whether you can walk for the rest of your life, whether you can see for the rest of your life, whether you can hold your shit in for the rest of your intensely short, intensely painful life. Do you understand?" The navigator looked wide-eyed up at Frost, looming over him like an outsized shadow. "I understand," he whispered. "Good," said Severard. "Wie gut," said Frost. "Very good indeed," said Glokta. "Tell me, Brother Longfoot, is one among your remarkable talents a superhuman resistance to pain?" The prisoner swallowed. "It is not." "Then the rules of this game are simple. I ask a question and you answer precisely, correctly, and, above all, briefly. Do I make myself clear? I understand completely. I do not speak other than to." Frost's fist sunk into his gut, and he folded up, eyes bulging. "Do you see," hissed Glokta, "that your answer there should have been yes?" The albino seized the wheezing navigator's leg and dragged his foot up onto the anvil. "Oh, cold metal on the sensitive soul. Quite unpleasant, but it could be so much worse. And something tells me it probably will be." Frost snapped a manacle shut around Longfoot's ankle. "I apologize for the lack of imagination," Glokta sighed. "In our defense, it's difficult to be always thinking of something new. I mean, smashing a man's feet with a lump hammer, it's so Pythagorean," ventured Frost. Glokta heard a sharp volley of laughter from behind Severod's mask, felt his own mouth grinning too. He really should have been a comedian, rather than a torturer. "Pedestrian? Precisely so. But don't worry, if we haven't got what we need by the time we've crushed everything below your knees to pulp, we'll see if we can think of something more inventive for the rest of your legs. How does that sound?" "But I have done nothing," squealed Longfoot, just getting his breath back. "I know nothing. I did. Forget about all that. It is meaningless now." Glokta leaned slowly, painfully forwards, let the head of the hammer tap gently against the iron beside the navigator's bare foot. "What I want you to concentrate on are my questions and your toes and this hammer. But don't worry if you find that difficult now. Believe me when I say once the hammer starts falling, you will find it easy to ignore everything else." Longfoot stared at the anvil, nostrils flaring as his breath snorted quickly in and out, and the seriousness of the situation finally impresses itself upon him. "Questions, then," said Glokta. "You are familiar with the man who styles himself Bayaz, the first of the Magi?" "Yes, please. Yes, until recently he was my employer." "Good." Glokta shifted in his chair, trying to find a more comfortable position while bending forwards. "Very good. You accompanied him on a journey? I was the guide." "What was your destination?" "The island of Shabulian, at the edge of the world." Glokta let the head of the hammer click against the anvil again. "Oh, come, come. The edge of the world. A fantasy, surely, truly, truly, truly." "I have seen it. I stood upon that island with my own feet." "Who went with you?" "There was Logen Ninefingers from the distant north." "Ah, yes, he of the scars and the tight lips. Pharaoh Muljin, a Cantic woman, the one that gave our friend Superior Goyle so much trouble. Jezal Danlutha, a Union officer, a posturing dolt. Malachus Quay, Bayaz's apprentice, the skinny liar with the troglodyte's complexion. And then Bayaz himself. 6 of you. Only 6. A long and a difficult journey to undertake. What was at the edge of the world that demanded such an effort? Besides water. Longfoot's lip trembled. "Nothing," Glokta frowned. and nudged at the navigator's big toe with the head of the hammer. "It was not there as sought. It was not there." He said he had been tricked. He said he had been tricked. What was it that he thought would be there? He said it was a stone? A stone, the woman asked him. He said it was a rock from the other side. The navigator shook his sweating head. An unholy notion. I am glad we found no such thing. Bayaz called it the seed. Glokta felt the grin melting from his face. The seed. Is it my imagination, or has the room grown colder? What else did he say about it? Just myths and nonsense? Try me? Stories about Glustrad and ruined Alcus and taking forms and stealing faces, about speaking to devils and the summoning of them, about the other side. What else? Glokta dealt Longfoot's toe a firmer tap with a hammer. He said the seed was the stuff of the world below, that it was left over from before the old time, when demons walked the earth. He said it was a great and powerful weapon, that he meant to use it against the Gurkish, against the prophet, a weapon from before the old time. The summoning of devils, the taking of forms. Canidius seemed to frown down from the wall more grimly than ever, and Glokta flinched. He remembered his nightmare trip into the house of the Maker, the patterns of light on the floor, the shifting rings in the darkness. He remembered stepping out onto the roof, standing high above the city without climbing a single stair. "You did not find it," he whispered, his mouth dry. "No, it was not there." And then, "That was all. We came back across the mountains. We made a raft and rowed the great Eos back to the sea. We took a ship from Chalcis, and I sit before you now." Glokta narrowed his eyes, studying carefully his prisoner's face. "There is more. I see it. What are you not telling me? I have told you everything. I have no talent for dissembling. That at least is true. His lies are plain. If your contract is ended, why are you still in the city?" Because the navigator's eyes darted round the room. "Oh dear me, no." The heavy hammer came down with all of Glokta's crippled strength and crushed Longfoot's big toe flat with a dull thud. The navigator gaped at it, eyes bulging from his head. That beautiful, horrible moment between stubbing your toe and feeling the hurt. Here it comes. Here it comes. Here it. Longfoot let vent a great shriek, squirmed around in his chair, face contorted with agony. "I know the feeling," said Glokta, wincing as he wriggled his own remaining toes around in his sweaty boot. "I truly do, and I sympathize." That blinding flash of pain, then upwashes the sick and dizzy faintness of the shattered bone. Then the slow pulsing up the leg that seems to drag the water from your eyes and make your whole body tremble. Longfoot gasped and whimpered, tears glistening on his cheeks. And what comes next? Weeks of limping, months of hobbling, crippled? "And if the next blow is to your ankle," Glokta prodded at Longfoot's shin with the end of the hammer, "or square on your kneecap, what then? Will you ever walk again? I know the feelings, well, believe me." "So how can I inflict them now on someone else?" He shrugged his twisted shoulders. "One of life's mysteries. Another?" And he raised the hammer again. "A Gurkish priest. He said that one day the first of the Magi might ask for a navigator, and that he wished to be told of it. That he wished to be told what happened afterward. He made threats. Terrible threats. We had no choice but to obey. I was waiting in the city for another navigator, who will convey the news. Only this morning I told him everything I have told you. I was about to leave Adua, I swear." "What was the name of this priest?" Longfoot said nothing, his wet eyes wide, the breath hissing in his nose. "Oh, why must they test me?" Glokta looked down at the navigator's toe. It was already starting to swell and go blotchy. Streaks of black blood blisters down each side, the nail deep, brooding purple. Edged with angry red, Glokta ground the end of the hammer's handle savagely into it. "The name of the priest! His name! Mamun! God help me! His name was Mamun. Mamun, Yulwe spoke of him in Dagoska, the first apprentice of the prophet himself. Together they broke the second law. Together they ate the flesh of men. Mamun, I see. Now, Glokta craned further forward, ignoring an ugly tingling up his twisted spine. What is Bayaz doing here? Longfoot gaped, a long string of drool hanging from his bottom lip. I don't know. What does he want with us? What does he want in the Union? I don't know. I have told you everything. Leaning forwards is a considerable ordeal for me. One that I begin to tire of. Glokta frowned and lifted the hammer, its polished head glinting. I just find ways from here to there. I only navigate. Please, no. Here it comes. Glokta tossed the hammer clattering down on the floor and leaned back, rocking his aching hips left and right to try and squeeze away the aches. Very well, he sighed. I am satisfied. The prisoner opened first one grimacing eye, and then the other. He looked up, face full of hope. I can go, Severid chuckled softly behind his mask. Even Frost made a kind of hissing sound. Of course you can go, Glokta smiled his empty smile. You can go back in your bag. The navigator's face went slack with horror. God take pity on me. If there is a God, he has no pity in him. Chapter 15. Fortunes of War. Lord Marshal Burr was in the midst of writing a letter, but he smiled up as West let the tent flap drop. How are you, Colonel? Well enough, thank you, sir. The preparations are well underway. We should be ready to leave at first light. As efficient as ever. Where would I be without you? Burr gestured at the decanter. Wine. Thank you, sir. West poured himself a glass. Would you care for one? Burr indicated a battered canteen at his elbow. I believe it would be prudent if I was to stick to water. West winced guiltily. He hardly felt as if he had the right to ask, but there was no escaping it now. How are you feeling, sir? Much better. Thank you for asking. Much, much better. He grimaced, put one fist over his mouth and burped. Not entirely recovered, but well on the way. As though to prove the point, he got up easily from his chair and strode to the map, hands clasped behind his back. His face had indeed regained much of its color. He no longer stood hunched over, wobbling as though he were about to fall. Lord Marshal, I wanted to speak to you about the battle at Dunbreck. Burr looked round. About what feature of it? When you was sick, West teetered on the brink of speaking, then let the words bubble out. I didn't send for a surgeon. I could have, but I'm proud that you didn't. West blinked. He had hardly dared to hope for that answer. You did what I would have wanted you to do. It is important that an officer should care, but it is vital that he should not care too much. He must be able to place his men in harm's way. He must be able to send them to their deaths if he deems it necessary. He must be able to make sacrifices and to weigh the greatest good without emotion counting in his choice. That is why I like you, West. You have compassion in you, but you have iron too. One cannot be a great leader without a certain ruthlessness. West found himself lost for words. The Lord Marshal chuckled and slapped the table with his open hand. But as it happens, no harm done, eh? The line held. The Northmen were turned out of England, and I tottered through alive, as you can see. I am truly glad to see you feeling better, sir. Burr grinned. Things are looking up. We are free to move again, with our lines of supply secure and the weather finally dry. If your dogmen's plan works, then we have a chance of finishing Bethod within a couple of weeks. They've been a damn courageous and useful set of allies. They have, sir, but this trap must be carefully baited and sprung at just the right moment. Burr peered at the map, rocking energetically back and forward on his heels. If we're too early, Bethod may slip away. If we're too late, our northern friends could be crushed before we can reach them. We have to make sure Bloody Polder and Bloody Croy don't drag their bloody feet. He winced and put a hand on his stomach, reached for his canteen and took a swig of water. I'd say you finally have them house-trained, Lord Marshal. Don't you believe it? They're only waiting for their chance to put the knife in me, the pair of them. And now the king is dead. Who knows who will replace him? Voting for a monarch. Have you ever heard of such a thing? West's mouth felt unpleasantly dry. It was almost impossible to believe that the whole business had been partly his own doing. It would hardly have done to take credit for it, however, given that his part had been to murder the heir to the throne in cold blood. Who do you think they will choose, sir? He croaked. I'm no courtier, West, for all I have a seat on the closed council. Brock, maybe, or Isha. I'll tell you one thing for sure, if you think there's violence going on up here, it'll be twice as brutal back home in Midland with half the mercy shown. The Marshal burped and swallowed and laid a hand on his stomach. No Northman's anything like as ruthless as those vultures on the closed council when they get started. And what will change when they have their new man in his robes of state? Not much, I'm thinking. Not much. Very likely, sir. I dare say there's nothing that we can do about it either way. A pair of blunt soldiers, eh, West? He stepped up close to the map again and traced their route northwards towards the mountains, his thick forefinger hissing over the paper. We must make sure we are ready to move at Suna. Every hour could be vital. Polder and Croy have had their orders, signed and delivered, sir, and they understand the urgency. Don't worry, Lord Marshal. We'll be ready to go in the morning. Don't worry. Burr snorted. I'm the commander of His Majesty's army. Worrying is what I do, but you should get some rest. He waved West out of the tent with one thick hand. I'll see you at first light. They played their cards by torchlight on the hillside, in the calm night under the stars, and by torchlight below them the Union army made its hurried preparations to advance. Lamps bobbed and moved, soldiers cursed in the darkness. Bangs and clatters and the ill-tempered calls of men and beasts floated through the still air. There'll be no sleep for anyone tonight. Brint finished dealing and scraped up his cards with his fingernails. I wish I could remember the last time I got more than 3 good hours together, said West. Back in Adua, most likely, before his sister came to the city, before the Marshal put him on his staff, before he came back to England, before he met Prince Ladisla, before the freezing journey north and the things he had done on it. He hunched his shoulders and frowned down at his dog-eared cards. "How's the Lord Marshal?" asked Jalenhorm. "Much better, I'm pleased to say. Thank the fates for that." Caspar raised his brows. "I don't much fancy the idea of that pedant Croy in charge, or Polder either," said Brint. "The man's ruthless as a snake." West could only agree. Polder and Croy hated him almost as much as they hated each other. If one of them took command, he'd be lucky if he found himself swabbing latrines the following day. Probably he'd be on a boat to Adua within the week. To swab latrines there. "Have you heard about Luther?" asked Jalenhorm. "What about him?" "He's back in Adua." West looked up sharply. Ade was in Adua, and the idea of the two of them together again was not exactly a heartening thought. "I had a letter from my cousin Ares." Caspar squinted as he clumsily fanned out his cards. "She says Jezal was far away somewhere, on some kind of mission for the king." A mission? West doubted anyone would have trusted Jezal with anything important enough to be called a mission. All of Adua is buzzing with it, apparently. "They say he led some charge or other," said Jalenhorm. "Across some bridge." West raised his eyebrows. "Did he now?" "They say he killed a score of men on the battlefield. Only a score. They say he bedded the Emperor's daughter," murmured Brint. West snorted. "Somehow I find that the most believable of the three." Caspar spluttered with laughter. "Well, whatever the truth of it, he's been made up to colonel." "Good for him," muttered West. "He always seems to fall on his feet, that boy. Did you hear about this revolt? My sister mentioned something about it in her last letter." "Why?" "There was a full-scale rebellion, Aris tells me. Thousands of peasants roaming the countryside, burning and looting, hanging anyone with a Dan in their name. Guess who was given command of the force sent to stop them?" West sighed. "Not our old friend Jezal Dan Luther by any chance." "The very same, and he persuaded them to go back to their homes." "How about that?" "Jezal Dan Luther," murmured Brint with the common touch. "Who could have thought it? Not me." Jalenhorm emptied his glass and poured himself another. "But they're calling him a hero now, apparently." "Toasting him in the taverns," said Brint. "Congratulating him in the open council," said Caspar. West scraped the jingling pile of coins towards him with the edge of his hand. "I wish I could say I was surprised, but I always guessed I'd be taking my orders from Lord Marshal Luther one of these days." It could have been worse, he supposed. It could have been Polder or Croy. The first pink glow of dawn was creeping across the tops of the hills as West walked up the slope towards the Lord Marshal's tent. It was past time to give the word to move. He saluted grimly to the guards beside the flap and pushed on through. One lamp was still burning in the corner beyond, casting a ruddy glow over the maps, over the folding chairs, and the folding tables, filling the creases in the blankets on Burr's bed with black shadows. West crossed to it, thinking over all the tasks he had to get done that morning, checking that he had left nothing out. Lord Marshal Polder and Croy are waiting for your word to move. Burr lay upon his camp bed, his eyes closed, his mouth open, sleeping peacefully. West would have liked to leave him there, but time was already wasting. "Lord Marshal," he snapped, walking up close to the bed. Still he did not respond. That was when West noticed that his chest was not moving. He reached out with hesitant fingers and held them above Burr's open mouth. No warmth, no breath. West felt the horror slowly spreading out from his chest to the very tips of his fingers. There could be no doubt. Lord Marshal Burr was dead. It was grey morning when the coffin was carried from the tent on the shoulders of 6 solemn guardsmen, the surgeon walking along behind with his hat in his hand. Polder, Croy, West, and a scattering of the army's most senior men lined the path to watch it go. Burr himself would no doubt have approved of the simple box in which his corpse would be shipped back to Adua, the same rough carpentry in which the Union's lowest levies were buried. West stared at it, numb. The man inside had been like a father to him, or the closest he had ever come to having one. A mentor and protector, a patron and a teacher, an actual father, rather than the bullying drunken worm that nature had cursed him with. And yet he did not feel sorrow as he stared at that rough wooden box. He felt fear. For the army and for himself. His first instinct was not to weep, it was to run. But there was nowhere to run to. Every man had to do his part, now more than ever. Croy lifted his sharp chin and stood up iron rigid as the shadow of the casket passed across them. Marshal Burr will be much missed. He was a staunch soldier and a brave leader. "A patriot," chimed in Polder, his lip trembling, one hand pressed against his chest as though it might burst open with emotion. "A patriot who gave his life for his country. It was my honor to serve under his orders." West wanted to vomit at their hypocrisy, but the fact was he desperately needed them. The dogman and his people were out in the hills, moving north, trying to lure Bethod into a trap. If the Union army did not follow, and soon, they would have no help when the king of the Northmen finally caught up to them. They would only succeed in luring themselves into their graves. "A terrible loss," said West, watching the coffin carried slowly down the hillside. "But we will honor him best by fighting on." Croy gave a regulation nod. "Well said, Colonel. We will make these Northmen pay. We must. To that end, we should make ready to advance. We are already behind schedule. And the plan relies on precise— what?" Polder stared at him as though he suspected West of having gone suddenly insane. "Move forward. Without orders? Without a clear chain of command?" Croy gave vent to an explosive snort. "Impossible." Polder violently shook his head. "Out of the question. Entirely out of the question." But Marshal Burr's orders were quite specific. "Circumstances have very plainly altered. Until I receive explicit instructions from the closed council, no one will be moving my division so much as a hair's breadth. General Polder, surely you, in this particular circumstance. I cannot but agree with General Croy. The army cannot move an inch until the open council has selected a new king. And the king has appointed a new Lord Marshal." And he and Croy eyed each other with the deepest hatred and distrust. West stood stock still, his mouth hanging slightly open, unable to believe his ears. West pictured the long miles of forested track to Ephrith, the long leagues of salt water to Adua. A week, perhaps, if the decision was made at once, and with the government in chaos that hardly seemed likely. In the meantime, the army would sit there, doing nothing, the hills before them all but undefended, while Bethod was given ample time to march north, slaughter the dogman and his friends, and return to his positions. Positions which, no doubt, untold numbers of their own men would be killed assaulting once the army finally had a new commander. All an utterly pointless, purposeless waste. Burr's coffin had only just passed out of sight, but already, it seemed, it was quite as if the man had never lived. West felt the horror creeping up his throat, threatening to strangle him with rage and frustration. "But the dogman and his Northmen, our allies, they are counting on our help." "Unfortunate," observed Croy. "Regrettable," murmured Polder, with a sharp intake of breath. But you must understand, Colonel West, that the entire business is quite out of our hands. Croy nodded stiffly. Out of our hands, and that is all. West stared at the two of them, and a terrible wave of powerlessness swept over him. The same feeling that he had when Prince Ladisla decided to cross the river, when Prince Ladisla decided to order the charge. The same feeling that he had when he floundered up in the mist, blood in his eyes, and knew the day was lost. That feeling that he was nothing more than an observer. That feeling that he had promised himself he would never have again. His own fault, perhaps. A man should only make such promises as he is sure he can keep. Chapter 16. The Kingmaker. It was a hot day outside, and sunlight poured in through the great stained-glass windows, throwing colored patterns across the tiled floor of the Lord's Round. The great space usually felt airy and cool, even in the summer. Today it felt stuffy, suffocating, uncomfortably hot. Jezal tugged his sweaty collar back and forth, trying to let some breath of air into his uniform without moving from his attitude of stiff attention. The last time he had stood in this spot, back to the curved wall, had been the day the Guild of Mercers was dissolved. It was hard to imagine that it was little more than a year ago. So much seemed to have happened since. He had thought then that the Lord's Round could not possibly have been more crowded, more tense, more excited. How wrong he had been. The curved banks of benches that took up the majority of the chamber were crammed to bursting with the Union's most powerful noblemen, and the air was thick with their expectant, anxious, fearful whispering. The entire open council was in breathless attendance, wedged shoulder to fur-trimmed shoulder, each man with the glittering chain that marked him out in gold or silver as the head of his family. Jezal might have had little more understanding of politics than a mushroom, but even he had to be excited by the importance of the occasion. The selection of a new High King of the Union by open vote. He felt a flutter of nerves in his throat at the thought. As occasions went, it was difficult to imagine one bigger. The people of Adua certainly knew it. Beyond the walls, in the streets and squares of the city, they were waiting eagerly for news of the open council's decision. Waiting to cheer their new monarch, or perhaps to jeer him, depending on the choice. Beyond the high doors of the Lord's Round, the square of marshals was a single swarming crowd, each man and woman in the agrient desperate to be the first to hear word from inside. Futures would be decided, great debts would be settled, fortunes won and lost on the result. Only a lucky fraction had been permitted into the public gallery, but still enough that the spectators were crushed together around the balcony, in imminent danger of being shoved over and plunging to the tiled floor below. The inlaid doors at the far end of the hall opened with a ringing crash, the echoes rebounding from the distant ceiling and booming around the great space. There was a rustling as every one of the councillors swiveled in his seat to look towards the entrance, and then a clatter of feet as the closed council approached steadily down the aisle between the benches. A gaggle of secretaries and clerks and hangers-on hurried after, papers and ledgers clutched in their eager hands. Lord Chamberlain Hoff strode at their head, frowning grimly. Behind him walked Salt, all in white, and Morovia, all in black, their faces equally solemn. Next came Varuz and Halleck, and Jezal's face fell. Who else but the first of the Magi, attired once again in his outrageous wizard's mantle, his apprentice skulking at his elbow. Bayaz grinned as though he were doing nothing more than attending the theater. Their eyes met, and the Magus had the gall to wink. Jezal was far from amused. To a swelling chorus of mutterings, the old men took their high chairs behind a long curved table, facing the noblemen on their banked benches. Their aides arranged themselves on smaller chairs, and laid out their papers, opened their books, whispered to their masters in hushed voices. The tension in the hall rose yet another step towards outright hysteria. Jezal felt a sweaty shiver run up his back. Glokta was there, beside the archlector, and the familiar face was anything but a reassurance. Jezal had been at Ardy's house only that morning and all night too. Needless to say, he had neither forsworn her nor proposed marriage. His head spun from going round and round the issue. The more time he spent with her, the more impossible any decision seemed to become. Glokta's fever-bright eyes swiveled to his, held them, then flicked away. Jezal swallowed with some difficulty. He had landed himself in a devil of a spot, all right. Whatever was he to do? Glokta gave Luther one brief glare, just to remind him of where we stand. Then he swiveled in his chair, grimacing as he stretched out his throbbing leg. pressing his tongue hard into his empty gums as he felt the knee click. "We have more important business than Jezal Dan Luther. Far more important business. For this one day, the power lies with the open council, not the closed, with the nobles, not the bureaucrats, with the many, not the few." Glokta looked down the table, at the faces of the great men who had guided the course of the Union for the last dozen years and more. Zult, Huff, Morovia, Varuz, and all the rest. Only one member of the closed council was smiling, its newest and least welcome addition. Bayaz sat in his tall chair, his only companion his pallid apprentice, Malachus Quai, and he looked scant companionship for anyone. The first of the Magi seemed to revel in the bowel-loosening tension as much as his fellows were horrified by it, his smile absurdly out of place among the frowns, worried faces, sweaty brows, nervous whispers to their cronies. They perch on razors, all of them, and I too, of course. Let us not forget poor Sandan Glokta, faithful public servant. We cling to power by our fingernails slipping. We sit like the accused at our own trials. We know the verdict is about to come down. Will it be an ill-deserved reprieve? Glokta felt a smile twitch the corner of his mouth. Or an altogether bloodier sentence? What say the gentlemen of the jury? His eyes flickered over the faces of the open council on their benches. 320 faces. Glokta pictured the papers nailed to the arch-lector's wall, and he matched them to the men sitting before him. The secrets, the lies, and the allegiances most of all. Which way will they vote? He saw some whose support he had made certain of, or as certain as we can be in these uncertain times. He saw Ingolstad's pink face among the press, near to the back, and the man swallowed and looked away. "As long as you vote our way, you can look where you like." He saw Wetterland's slack features a few rows back, and the man gave him an almost imperceptible nod. So our last offer was acceptable. 4 more for the Archlector? Enough to make the difference and keep us in our jobs? To keep us all alive? Glokta felt his empty grin widen. We shall soon see in the center of the front row, among the oldest and best families of Midderland's nobility, Lord Brock sat, arms folded, with a look of hungry expectation. Our front-runner, keen to spring from the gate. Not far from him was Lord Isher, old and stately. The second favorite, still with every chance. Barazin and Hugin sat nearby, wedged uncomfortably together, and occasionally looking sideways at each other with some distaste. Who knows? A late spurt and the throne could be theirs. Lord Governor Skald sat on the far left, at the front of the delegations from England and Sterikland. New men from the provinces. But a vote is still a vote, however we might turn our noses up. Over on the far right, 12 aldermen of Westport sat, marked as outsiders by the cut of their clothes and the tone of their skin. Yet a dozen votes still, and undeclared. There were no representatives of Dagoska today. There are none left at all, alas. Lord Governor Verms was relieved of his post. His son lost his head and could not attend. As for the rest of the city, it was conquered by the Gurkish. Well, some wastage is inevitable. We will struggle on without them. The board is set, the pieces ready to be moved. Who will be the winner of this sordid little game, do we suppose? We shall soon see. The announcer stepped forwards into the center of the circular floor, lifted his staff high above his head, and brought it down with a series of mighty crashes that echoed from the polished marble walls. The chatter faded. The magnates shuffled round to face the floor, every face drawn with tension. A pregnant silence settled over the packed hall, and Glokta felt a flurry of twitches slink up the left side of his face and set his eyelid blinking. "I call this meeting of the Open Council of the Union to order," thundered the announcer, slowly. And with the grimmest of frowns, Lord Hoff rose to face the councillors. "My friends, my colleagues, my lords of Midderland, England, and Sterikland, aldermen of Westport, Guslav the Fifth, our king is dead. His 2 heirs are dead, one at the hands of our enemies in the north, the other our enemies in the south. Truly, this is a time of troubles, and we are left without a leader." He held his arms up imploringly to the councillors. "You are now faced with a grave responsibility. The selection from among your number of a new High King of the Union. Any man who holds a chair on this Open Council is a potential candidate. Any of you could be our next king." A volley of near-hysterical whispers floated down from the public gallery, and Hoff was obliged to raise his voice to shout over them. Such a vote has only been taken once before in the long history of our great nation. After the Civil War and the fall of Marlik the Mad, when Arnol was raised to the throne by near unanimous accord. He it was who sired the great dynasty that lasted until a few short days ago. He let fall his arms and stared sadly down at the tiles. "Wise was the choice your forebears made that day. We can only hope that the man elected here this morning, by and in full view of his peers, will found a dynasty just as noble, just as strong, just as even-handed, and just as long-lived. We can only hope for someone who will do as he's damn well told." Pharaoh shoved a woman in a long gown out of her way. She elbowed past a fat man, his jowls trembling with outrage. She forced her way through to the balcony and glared down. The wide chamber below was crammed with fur-trimmed old men, crowded together on high banks of seating, each with a sparkling chain round his shoulders and a sparkling sheen of sweat across his pale face. Opposite them, behind a curved table, was another set of men, fewer in number. She scowled as she saw Bayaz sitting at one end of them, smiling as if he knew some secret that no one else could guess. Just like always, beside him stood a fat pink with a face full of broken veins, shouting something about each man voting with his conscience. Pharaoh snorted. She would have been surprised if the few hundred men down there had 5 whole consciences between them. It seemed as if they were all attending carefully to the fat man's address, but Pharaoh saw differently. The room was full of signals. Men glanced sideways at one another and gave subtle nods. They winked with one eye or the other. They touched forefingers to noses and ears. They scratched in strange ways. A web of secrets spreading out to every part of the chamber, and with Bayaz sitting grinning in the midst of it. Some way behind him, with his back to the wall, Jezal Dan Luthar was standing in a uniform festooned with shiny thread. Pharaoh curled her lip. She could see it in the way he stood. He had learned nothing. The announcer stabbed at the floor with his stick again. "Voting will now begin." There was a ragged groan, and Pharaoh saw the woman she had pushed past earlier slide to the floor in a faint. Someone dragged her away, flapping a piece of paper in her face, and the ill-tempered press closed in tight behind. In the first round the field will be narrowed to 3 choices. There will be a show of hands for each candidate in order of the most extensive lands and holdings. Down below on their benches, the richly dressed sweated and trembled like men before a battle. "Firstly," shrieked a clerk, voice cracking as he consulted an enormous ledger, "Lord Brock." Up in the gallery people mopped their faces, muttering and gasping as if they were facing death. Perhaps some of them were. The whole place reeked of doubt, and excitement, and terror. So strong it was contagious. So strong that even Pharaoh, who did not care a shit for the pinks and their damn vote, felt her mouth dry, her fingers itching, her heart thumping fast. The announcer turned to face the chamber. "The first candidate will be Lord Brock. All those members of the Open Council who wish to vote for Lord Brock as the next High King of the Union, will you please raise your one moment, my lords?" Glokta jerked his head round, but his neck bones stuck halfway, and he had to peer from the corner of one dewy eye. He need hardly have bothered. I could have guessed without looking who spoke. Bayaz had risen from his chair, and was now smiling indulgently towards the Open Council. With perfect timing, a volley of outraged calls rose up from its members in response. "This is no time for interruptions. Lord Brock, I vote for Brock. A new dynasty." Bayaz's smile did not slip a hair's breadth. "But what if the old dynasty could continue? What if we could make a new beginning?" And he glanced significantly across the faces of his colleagues on the closed council, while keeping all that is good in our present government. What if there was a way to heal wounds, rather than to cause them? "How?" came the mocking calls. "What way?" Bayaz's smile grew broader yet. "Why, a royal bastard." There was a collective gasp. Lord Brock bounced from his seat, quite as if he had a spring under his arse. "This is an insult to this house, a scandal, a slur on the memory of King Guslav. Indeed, he now seems not only a drooling vegetable, but a lecherous one." Other councillors rose to join him, faces red with outrage, white with fury, shaking fists and making angry calls. The whole sweep of benches seemed to honk and grunt and wriggle, just like the pig pens at the slaughterhouse, clamoring for any swill on offer. Wait, shrieked the arch-lector, his white-gloved hands raised in entreaty, sensing some faint glimmer of hope in the darkness perhaps. Wait, my lords, there is nothing to be lost by listening. We shall have the truth here, even if it is painful. The truth should be our only concern. Glokta had to chomp his gums down on a splutter of laughter. Oh, of course, your eminence. The truth has ever been your only care. But the babble gradually subsided. Those counselors who were on their feet were shamed back into line. Their habit of obedience to the closed council is not easily broken. But then habits never are, especially of obedience. Only ask my mother's dogs. They grumbled their way back into their seats and allowed Bayaz to continue. Your lordships have perhaps heard of Carmi Dan Roth. A swell of noise from the gallery above confirmed that the name was not unfamiliar. She was a great favorite with the king when he was younger. A very great favorite, so much so that she became pregnant with a child. Another wave of muttering, louder. I have always carried a sentimental regard for the Union. I have always had one eye on its welfare, despite the scant thanks I have received for it. And Bayaz gave the very briefest curl of his lip towards the members of the closed council. So, when the lady died in childbirth, I took the king's bastard into my care. I placed him with a noble family to be well-raised and well-educated, in case the nation should one day find itself without an heir. My actions now seem prudent indeed. Lies. Someone shrieked, lies, but few voices joined in. Their tone instead was one of curiosity. A natural son? A bastard? Carmi Dan Roth, did he say? They have heard this tale before. Rumors perhaps, but familiar ones. Familiar enough to make them listen, to make them judge whether it will be in their interests to believe. But Lord Brock was not convinced. A blatant fabrication. It will take more than rumor and conjecture to sway this house. Produce this bastard if you can. So-called first of the Magi. Work your magic. No magic is needful, sneered Bayaz. The king's son is already with us in the chamber. Gasps of consternation from the gallery. Sighs of amazement from the councillors, stunned silence from the closed council and their aides, every eye fixed on Bayaz's pointing finger as he swept out his hand towards the wall. No other man than Colonel Jezal Dan Luther. The spasm began in Glokta's toeless foot, shot up his ruined leg, set his twisted spine shivering from his arse right to his skull, made his face twitch like an angry jelly, made his few teeth rattle in his empty gums, set his eyelid flickering fast as a fly's wings. The echoes of Bayaz's last utterance whispered round the suddenly silent hall. Luther, 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 you must be fucking joking. The pale faces of the councillors were frozen, hanging in wide-eyed shock, squashed up in narrow-eyed rage. The pale men behind the table gaped. The pale people at the balcony pressed their hands over their mouths. Jezal Dan Luther, who had wept with self-pity while Pharaoh had stitched his face. Jezal Dan Luther, that leaky pisspot of selfishness and arrogance and vanity. Jezal Dan Luther, who she had called the Princess of the Union, had a chance of ending the day as its king. Pharaoh could not help herself. She let her head drop back, and she hacked, and coughed, and gurgled with amusement. Tears sprung up in her eyes, her chest shook, and her knees trembled. She clung to the rail of the balcony. She gasped, blubbered, drooled. Pharaoh did not laugh often. She could scarcely remember the last time. But Jezal Dan Luther, a king? This was funny. High above in the public gallery, someone had started laughing. A jagged cackling completely inappropriate to the solemnity of the moment. But Jezal's first impulse, when he realized that it was his name that Bayaz had called out, when he realized that it was him the outstretched finger was pointing to, was to join in. His second, as every face in the entire vast space turned instantly towards him, was to vomit. The result was an ungainly cough, a shame-faced grin, an unpleasant burning at the very back of the mouth, and an instant paling of the complexion. He found himself croaking, but without the slightest idea of how he would continue his sentence. What words could possibly help at a time like this? All he could do was stand there, sweating profusely, trembling under his stiff uniform, as Bayaz continued in ringing tones, his voice cutting over the laughter bubbling down from above. I have the sworn statement of his adoptive father here, attesting that all I say is true, But does it matter? The truth of it is plain for any man to see. His arm shot out towards Jezal again. Ian, he won a contest before you all, and accompanied me on a journey full of peril with never a complaint. He charged the bridge at Darmium, without a thought for his own safety. He saved Adua from the revolt without a drop of blood spilled. His valor and his prowess, his wisdom and his selflessness are well known to all. Can it be doubted that the blood of kings flows in his veins? Jezal blinked. Odd facts began to bob to the surface of his sluggish mind. He was not much like his brothers. His father had always treated him differently. He had got all the looks in the family. His mouth was hanging open, but he found he could not close it. When his father had seen Bayaz at the contest, he had turned white as milk, as though he recognized him. He had done, and he was not Jezal's father at all. When the king had congratulated Jezal on his victory, he had mistaken him for his own son. Not such blinding folly, evidently, as everyone might have thought. The old fool had been closer to the mark than anyone. Suddenly, it all made horrible sense. He was a bastard. Literally. He was the natural son of a king. What was much more, he was slowly and with increasing terror beginning to realize he was now being seriously considered as his replacement, shouted Bayaz over the disbelieving chatter gaining steadily in volume with every passing moment. You sit amazed. It is a difficult fact to accept, I can understand, especially with the suffocating heat in here. He signaled to the guards at both ends of the hall. Open the gates, please, and let us have some air. The doors were heaved open, and a gentle breeze washed into the lords round. A cooling breeze and something else with it. Hard to make out at first, and then coming more clearly. Something like the noise of the crowd at the contest. Soft, repetitive, and more than a little frightening. Luther, Luther, Luther! The sound of his own name, chanted over and over from a multitude of throats beyond the walls of the Agrient, was unmistakable. Bayaz grinned. It would seem that the people of the city have already chosen their favored candidate. This is not their choice, roared Brock, still on his feet, but only now regaining his composure. Any more than it is yours. But it would be foolish to ignore their opinion. The support of the commoners cannot be lightly dismissed, especially in these restless times. If they were to be disappointed in their current mood, who knows what might occur? Riots in the streets, or worse. None of us wants that, surely, Lord Brock. Several of the councillors shifted nervously on their benches, glancing towards the open doors, whispering to their neighbors. If the atmosphere in the round had been confused before, it was flabbergasted now. But the worry and surprise of the open council was nothing compared to Jezal's own. A fascinating tale, but if he supposes that the Union's greediest men will simply take his word for it and give the crown away, he has made a staggering blunder, whether commoners wet themselves at the name of Luther or not. Lord Isher rose from the front row for the first time, stately and magnificent, the jewels on his chain of office flashing. And so the furious objections, the outraged denials, the demands for punishment begin. I wholeheartedly believe, called Isher in ringing tones, that the man known as Colonel Jezal Dan Luthar is none other than the natural child of the recently deceased King Guslav V. Glokta gawped. So it seemed, did almost everyone else in the chamber, and that he is further fitted for rule on account of his exemplary character and extensive achievements, both within the Union and outside it. Another peal of ugly laughter gurgled down from above, but Isher ignored it. My vote, and the votes of my supporters, are wholeheartedly for Luther. If Luther's eyes had gone any wider, they might have dropped from his skull. And who can blame him? Now one of the Westport delegation was on his feet. The aldermen of Westport vote as one man for Luther. He sang out in his Styrian accent. Natural son and heir to King Guslav V. A man jumped up a few rows back. He glanced quickly and somewhat nervously at Glokta. None other than Lord Ingolstad. The lying little shit. What's he about? I am for Luther, he shrieked. And I for Luther, Wetterland, his hooded eyes giving away no more emotion than they had when he fed the ducks. Better offers, eh, gentlemen? Or better threats? Glokta glanced at Bayaz. He had a faint smile on his face as he watched others spring from their benches to declare their support for the so-called natural son of Guslav V. Meanwhile, the chanting of the crowds out in the city could still be heard. Luther, Luther, Luther. As the shock drained away, Glokta's mind began to turn. So that is why our first of the Magi cheated in the contest on Luther's behalf. That is why he has kept him close all this time. That is why he procured for him so notable a command. If he had presented some nobody as the king's son, he would have been laughed from the chamber. But Luther, love him or hate him, is one of us. He is known, he is familiar, he is acceptable. Glokta looked at Bayaz with something close to admiration. Pieces of a puzzle, patient years in the preparation, calmly slotted into place before our disbelieving eyes, and not a thing that we can do, except, perhaps, to dance along to his tune? Sult leaned sideways in his chair and hissed urgently in Glokta's ear. This boy, Luther, what manner of a man is he? Glokta frowned over at him, standing dumbstruck by the wall. He looked at that moment as if he could scarcely be trusted to control his own bowels, let alone a country. Still, you could have said much the same for our previous king, and he discharged his duties admirably. His duties of sitting and drooling, while we ran the country for him. Before his trip abroad, Your Eminence, he was as empty-headed, spineless and vain a young fool as one might hope to find in the entire nation. The last time I spoke to him, though, perfect. But, Your Eminence, you must see that this is all according to Bayaz's plans. We will deal with that old fool later. I am taking advice. Sult turned to hiss at Morovia without waiting for a reply. Now the two old men looked out at the open council. Now they gave their nods and their signals to the men they controlled. All the while, Bayaz smiled, the way an engineer might smile as his new machine works for the first time, precisely according to his design. The Magus caught Glokta's eye, and gave the faintest of nods. There was nothing for Glokta to do but shrug, and give a toothless grin of his own. I wonder if the time may come when we all wish we had voted for Brock. Now Morovia was speaking hurriedly to Hoff. The Lord Chamberlain frowned, nodded, turned towards the house, and signaled to the announcer, who beat furiously on the floor for silence. The discovery of a natural son plainly changes the complexion of this debate. Fate would appear to have gifted us the opportunity to continue the dynasty of Arnault without further doubt or conflict. Fate gifts us. I rather think we have a less disinterested benefactor, in view of these exceptional circumstances, and the strong support already voiced by members of this House. The closed council judges that an exceptional vote should now be taken. A single vote on whether the man previously known as Jezal Dan Luther should be declared High King of the Union forthwith. "No," roared Brock, veins bulging from his neck. "I strongly protest." But he might as well have protested against the incoming tide. The arms were already shooting up in daunting numbers. The aldermen of Westport, the supporters of Lord Isher, the votes that Sult and Morovia had bullied and bribed their way, all lending their support to Luther with a speed that strongly implies a previous arrangement. Bayaz sat back, arms folded, as he watched the hands shoot skywards. It was already becoming terribly clear that over half of the room was in favor. "Yes," hissed the Archlector, a smile of triumph on his face. "Yes, yes." Those who had not raised their arms, men committed to Brock or Berezin or Hugin, stared about them, stunned and not a little horrified at how quickly the world seemed to have passed them by, how quickly the chance at power has slipped through their fingers, and who can blame them? It has been a surprising day for us all. Lord Brock made one last effort, raising a finger to stab at Luther, still goggling by the wall. "What proof have you that he is the son of anyone in particular, besides the word of this old liar?" And he gestured at Bayaz. "What proof, my lords? I demand proof!" Angry mutterings swept up and down the benches, but no one made themselves conspicuous. The second time Lord Brock has stood before this council and demanded proof. And the second time no one has cared. What proof could there be after all? A birthmark on Luther's arse in the shape of a crown. Proof is boring. Proof is tiresome. Proof is an irrelevance. People would far rather be handed an easy lie than search for a difficult truth, especially if it suits their own purposes. And most of us would far rather have a king with no friends and no enemies than a king with plenty of both. Most of us would rather have things stay as they are than risk an uncertain future. More hands were raised and more. Luther's support had rolled too far for any one man to stop it. Now it is like a great boulder hurtling down a slope. They dare not stand in its way in case they are squashed to gravy. So they crowd in behind and add their own weight to it, and hope to snatch the scraps up afterward. Brock turned, a deadly frown across his face, and he stormed down the aisle and out of the chamber. Probably he had hoped that a good part of the open council would storm out with him. But in that, as in so much else today, he must be harshly disappointed. No more than a dozen of his most loyal followers accompanied him on the lonely march out of the Lord's round. The others have better sense. Lord Isher exchanged a long look with Bayaz, then raised his pale hand. Lords Barrison and Hugin watched the best part of their support flocking to the cause of the young pretender, glanced at each other, retreated back into their seats and stayed carefully silent. Skald opened his mouth to call out, looked about him, thought better of it, and with evident reluctance, slowly lifted his arm. There were no further protests. King Jezal I was raised to the throne by near unanimous accord. Chapter 17. The Trap. Coming up into the high places again, and the air felt crisp and clear, sharp and familiar in Logen's throat. Their march had begun gently as they came up through the woods, a rise you'd hardly notice. Then the trees thinned out, and their path took them up a valley between grassy fells, cracked with trickling streams, patched with sedge and gorse. Now the valley had narrowed to a gorge, hemmed in on both sides with slopes of bare rock and crumbling scree, getting always steeper. Above them, on either side of that gorge, two great crags rose up. Beyond, the hazy hints of mountain peaks gray and light gray, and even lighter gray, melted in the distance into the heavy gray sky. The sun was out and meaning business, and it was hot to walk in, bright to squint into. They were all weary from climbing and worrying and looking behind them for Bethod. 400 carles, maybe, and as many painted-face hillmen, all spread out in a great long column, cursing and spitting, boots crunching and sliding in the dry dirt and the loose stones. Crummock's daughter was struggling up ahead of Logen, bent double under the weight of her father's hammer, hair round her face dark with sweat. Logen's own daughter would have been older than that by now, if she hadn't been killed by the Shanka, along with her mother and her brothers. That thought gave Logen a hollow, guilty feeling. A bad one. You want a hand with that mallet, girl? No, I fucking don't. She screamed at him, then dropped it off her shoulder and dragged it away up the slope by the handle, scowling at him all the way, the hammer's head clattering along and leaving a groove in the stony soil. Logen blinked after her. Seemed his touch with the women went all the way down to ones 10 years old. Crummock came up behind him, finger bones swinging round his neck. Fierce. Ah, ye've to be fierce to get on in my family. He leaned close and gave a wink. And she's the fiercest of the lot, that little bitch. If I'm honest, she's my favorite. He shook his head as he watched her dragging at that hammer. She'll make some poor bastard one hell of a wife one day. We're here, in case you were wondering. Hey! Logen wiped sweat from his face, frowning as he stared about. Where's they then? He realized. Crummock's fortress, if you could call it that, was right ahead of them. The valley was no more than 100 strides now from one cliff to the other, and a wall was built across it. An ancient and crumbling wall of rough blocks, so full of cracks, so coated with creeper, brambles, seeding grass, that it seemed almost part of the mountains. It wasn't a whole lot steeper than the valley itself, and as tall as 3 men on each other's shoulders at its highest, sagging here and there as if it was about to fall down on its own. In the center was a gate of weathered gray planks, splattered with lichen, managing to seem rotten and dried out both at once. To one side of the wall there was a tower, built up against the cliff, or at least there was a great natural pillar sticking out from the rock with half-cut chunks of stone mortared to the top, making a wide platform on the cliffside, overlooking the wall from high above. Logen looked at the dogman as he trudged up, and the dogman squinted at that wall as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "This is it," growled Dow, coming up next to them, his lip curling. A few trees had taken root at one side, just under the tower, must have been 50 years ago at least. Now they loomed up over the wall. A man could have climbed them easily and stepped inside the place without even stretching far. Toole stared up at the ragged excuse for a fortress. A strong place in the mountains, you said. Strong-ish. Crummock waved his hand. We hillmen have never been much for building and so on. What were you expecting? 10 marble towers and a hall bigger'n Scarling's? I was expecting a halfway decent wall at least, growled Dow. Bah, walls? I heard you were cold as snow and hot as piss, Black Dow, and now you want walls to hide behind. We'll be outnumbered 10-1 if Bethod does turn up. You mad fuck. You mad fuck. You're damn right I want a wall. And you told us there'd be one. But you said it yourself, friend. Crummock spoke soft and slow as though he was explaining it to a child, and he tapped at the side of his head with one thick finger. I'm mad. Mad as a sack of owls, and everyone says so. I can't remember the names of my own children. Who knows what I think a wall looks like? I hardly know what I'm talking of myself, most of the time. And you're fool enough to listen to me. You must be mad yourselves. Logen rubbed at the bridge of his nose and he gave a groan. The dogmen's carles were gathering near them now, looking up at that mossy heap of stones and muttering to each other, far from happy. Logen could hardly blame them. It was a long, hot walk. They'd had to find this at the end of it, but they had no choices as far as he could see. It's a bit late to build a better one, he grumbled. We'll have to do what we can with what we've got. That's it, bloody nine. You need no wall and you know it. Crummock clapped Logen on the arm with his great fat hand. You cannot die. You're beloved of the moon, my fine new friend above all others. You cannot die, not with the moon looking over you. You cannot shut up, said Logen. They crunched sourly across the slope towards the gate. Crummock called out, and the old doors wobbled open. A pair of suspicious hillmen stood on the other side, watching them come in. They slogged up a steep ramp cut into the rock, all tired and grumbling, and came out into a flat space above. A saddle between the two crags might have been 100 strides wide, and 200 long, sheer cliffs of stone all round. There were a few wooden shacks and sheds scattered about the edges, all green with old moss. A slumping stone hall built against the rock face with smoke rising out of a squat chimney. Just next to it, a narrow stair was cut into the cliff, climbing up to the platform at the top of the tower. Nowhere to run to, Logen muttered. If things turned sour, Crummock only grinned the wider. Course not. That's the whole point, ain't it? Bet'll think he's got us like beetles in a bottle. He will have, growled the dogman. Aye, but then your friends will come up behind him and want he get the father of all shocks, though. It'll almost be worth it for the look on his face, the shit-eating bastard. Logen worked his mouth and spat onto the stony ground. Oh, I wonder what the looks on our faces'll be by then. All slack and corpse-like would be my guess. A herd of shaggy sheep were pressed in tight together in a pen, staring around wide-eyed, bleating to each other. Hemmed in and helpless, and Logen knew exactly how they felt. From inside the fort, where the ground was a good deal higher, there was hardly a wall at all. You could have stepped up onto its walkway, if you'd got long legs and stood at its crumbling, moss-ridden excuse for a parapet. Don't you worry your beautiful self about nothing, bloody nine, laughed Crummock. My fortress could be better built, I'll grant you, but the ground is with us, and the mountains, and the moon, all smiling on our bold endeavor. This is a strong place, with a strong history. Do you not know the story of Lafa the Brave? Can't say that I do. Logen wasn't altogether sure he wanted to hear it now, but he was in the long habit of not getting what he wanted. Lafa was a great bandit chief of the hillmen, a long time ago. He raided all the clans around for years, him and his brothers. One hot summer the clans had enough, so they banded together and hunted him in the mountains. Here's where he made his last stand, right here in this fortress. Lafa and his brothers and all his people. What happened? Asked Dogman. They all got killed, and their heads cut off and put in a sack, and the sack was buried in the pit they used to shit in. Crummock beamed. Guess that's why they call it a last stand, eh? That's it. That's the story. That's all of it that I know, but I'm not right sure what else there could be. That was pretty much the end for Lafa, I'd say. Thanks for the encouragement. That's all right. That's all right. I've more stories if you need more. No. That's enough for me. Logen turned and started walking off, the dogman beside him. You can tell me more once we've won. Ha! Bloody nine! Shouted Crummock after him. That'll be a story in itself, eh? You can fool me. You can't fool in. You're like I am, beloved of the moon. We fight hardest when our backs are to the mountains and there's no way out. Tell me it ain't so. We love it when we got no choices. Oh, Logen muttered to himself as he stalked off towards the gate. There's nothing better than no choices. Dogman stood at the foot of the wall, staring up at it, and wondering what to do to give him and the rest a better chance at living out the week. It'd be a good thing to get all this creeper and grass cleared off it, he said. Makes it a damn sight easier to climb. Tool raised an eyebrow. You sure it ain't all that plant that's holding it together? Grim tugged at a vine and a shower of dried-out mortar came with it. Might be you're right, Dogman sighed. Cut off what we can then, eh? Some work at the top would be time well spent and all. Be nice to have a decent stack of stones to hide behind when Bethod starts shooting arrows at us. That it would, said Tull. And we could dig us a ditch down here in front, plant some stakes round the bottom, make it harder for him to get up close. Then close that gate, nail it shut, and wedge a load of rocks in behind it. We'll have trouble getting out, said Tull. Logen snorted. Us getting out won't be the pressing problem, I'm thinking. You've a point right there, laughed Crummock, ambling up with a lit pipe in his fat fist. It's Bethod's boys getting in that we should worry on. Getting these walls patched up would be a good start at settling my mind. Dogman pointed at the trees grown up over the wall. We need to get these cut down and cut up, carve us out some stone, mix us some mortar and all the rest. Crummock, you got people can do that? You got tools? He puffed at his pipe, frowning at Dogman all the long while, then blue-brown smoke. I might have, but I won't take my orders from such as you, Dogman. The moon knows my talents, and they're for murder, not mortaring. Grim rolled his eyes. Who will you take orders from? Asked Logen. I'll take 'em from you, Bloody Nine, and from no other. The moon loves you, and I love the moon, and you're the man for... Then get your people together, and get to fucking cutting wood and stone. I'm bored of your blather. Crummock knocked out his ashes sourly against the wall. You're no fun at all, you boys. You do nothing but worry. You need to think on the sunny side of this. The worst that can happen is that Bethod don't show. The worst? Dogman stared at him. You sure? What about if Bethod does come, and his Carls kick your wall over like a pile of turds and kill every last one of us? Crummock's brow furrowed. He frowned down at the ground. He squinted up at the clouds. True, he said, breaking out in a smile. That is worse. You got a fast mind, lad. Dogman gave a long sigh and stared down into the valley. The wall might not have been all they'd hoped for, but you couldn't knock the position. Coming up that steep slope against a set of hard men, high above and with nothing to lose, ready and more unable to kill you. That was no one's idea. Oh, fun. Tough to get organized down there, said Logen, speaking Dogman's own thoughts. Especially with arrows plunging on you from above, and nothing to hide behind. Hard to make numbers count. I wouldn't much fancy trying it myself. How are we going to work it if they come? I reckon we'll make 3 crews. Dogman nodded to the tower. Me up there with 50 or so of the best archers. Good spot to shoot from, that. Nice and high, and a good view of the front o' the wall, said Grim. Maybe some strong lads to throw a rock or two. I'll lob a rock, said Tull. Fair enough. Fair enough. Then the pick of our lads up on the wall, ready to take 'em on hand to hand if they get up there. That'll be your crew, I reckon, Logen. Dow and Shivers and Red Hat can be your seconds. Logen nodded, not looking all that happy. Aye, all right. Then Crummock up behind with his hillmen, ready to charge if they make it through the gate. If we last more'n a day, maybe you can swap over. Hillmen on the wall, Logen and the rest behind. That's quite the plan for a little man. Crummock clapped him on the shoulder with a huge hand and damn near knocked him on his face. Like as not you had it from the moon while you slept. Ain't one thing in it I'd change. He slapped his meaty fist into his palm. I love a good charge. I hope the Southerners don't come and leave more for the rest of us. I want to charge now. Good for you, grunted Dogman. Maybe we can find you a cliff to charge off. He squinted into the sun, taking another look up at the wall that held all of their hopes. He wouldn't have cared to try and climb it, not from this side, but it wasn't halfway as high, or as thick, or as strong as he'd have liked. You don't always get things the way you like, Three Trees would have said, but just once would have been nice. The trap is ready, said Crummock, grinning down into the valley. The Dogman nodded, The only question is, who'll get caught in it, Bethod or us? Logen walked through the night between the fires. Some fires had carls round them, drinking Crummock's beer and smoking his chaga, and laughing at stories. Others had hillmen, looking like wolves in the shifting light with their rough furs, their tangled hair, their half-painted faces. One was singing somewhere, strange songs in a strange tongue that yapped and warbled like the animals in the forest, rose and fell like the valleys and the peaks. Logen had to admit he'd been smoking for the first time in a while and drinking too. Everything felt warm, the fires, and the men, and the cool wind even. He wove his way through the dark, looking for the fire where the dogman and the rest were sitting, and not having a clue which way to find it. He was lost, and in more ways than one. How many men you killed, Da? Had to be Crummock's daughter. There weren't too many high voices round that camp. More was the pity. Logen saw the hillman's great shape in the darkness, his 3 children sitting near him, their outsized weapons propped up in easy reach. Oh, I've killed a legion of them, Isern. Crummock's great deep voice rumbled out at Logen as he came closer. More'n I can remember. Your father might not have all his wits all the time, but he's a bad enemy to have. One of the worst. You'll see the truth of that close up, when Bethod and his arslickers come calling. He looked up and saw Logen coming through the night. I swear, and I don't doubt Bethod would swear with me, there's only one bastard in all the north who's nastier and bloodier and harder than your father, asked the boy with the shield. Logen felt his heart sinking as Crummock's arm lifted up to point towards him. Why, that's him there, the bloody 9, the girl glared at Logen. Has nothing, you could have him. Down out by the dead, not me. Don't even say it, girl, in case I make a piss puddle big enough to drown you in. He don't look like much, and there's a lesson for all 3 of you. Not looking much, not saying much, not seeming much, that's a good first step in being dangerous. 9 fingers? Then when you let the devil go free, it's twice the shock for whatever poor bastard's on the end of it. Shock and surprise, my little beauties, and quickness to strike and lack of pity. These are the things that make a killer. Size and strength and a big loud voice are all right in their place, but they're nothing to that murderous, monstrous, merciless speed, bloody 9? It was a hard lesson for children, but Logen's father had taught it to him young, and he'd kept it in mind all these years. It's a sorry fact. He who strikes first often strikes last. That he does, shouted Crummock, slapping his great thigh. Well said, but it's a happy fact, not a sorry one. You remember old Willem, don't you, my children? Thunder got him, shouted the boy with the shield. In a storm, up in the high places. That it did. One moment he's standing there, the next there's a noise like the world falling, and a flash like the sun, and Wylam's dead as my boots. His feet was on fire, laughed the girl. That they were, is earned. You saw how fast he died, how much the shock, how little mercy that the lightning showed, well, and Crummock's eyes slid across to Logen. That's what it'd be to cross that man there. One moment you'd say your hard word, the next. He clapped his hands together with a crack and made the 3 children jump. He'd send you back to the mud. Faster than the sky killed Willem, and with no more regret. Your life hangs on a thread. Every moment you stand within 2 strides of that nothing-looking bastard there, does it not? Bloody 9? Well, Logen wasn't much enjoying this. How many men you killed then? The girl shouted at him, sticking her chin out. Crummock laughed and rubbed his hand in her hair. The numbers aren't made to count that high, is there? He's the king of killers. No man made more deadly, not anywhere under the moon. What about that feared? Asked the boy with the spear. Hooed Crummock, smiling right across his face. He's not a man, Scofen. He's something else. But I wonder, Fenrir's the feared and the bloody 9 setting to kill one another. He rubbed his hands together. Now that is a thing I would like to see. That is a thing the moon would love to shine upon. His eyes rolled up towards the sky, and Logen followed them with his own. The moon was up there, sitting in the black heavens, big and white, glowing like new fire. Chapter 18. Horrible old men! The tall windows stood open, allowing a merciful breeze to wash through the wide salon. to give the occasional cooling kiss to Jezal's sweating face, to make the vast antique hangings flap and rustle. Everything in the chamber was outsized. The cavernous doorways were 3 times as high as a man, and the ceiling, painted with the peoples of the world bowing down before an enormous golden sun, was twice as high again. The immense canvases on the walls featured life-size figures in assorted majestic poses, whose warlike expressions would give Jezal uncomfortable shocks whenever he turned around. It seemed a space for great men, for wise men, for epic heroes or mighty villains. A space for giants. Jezal felt a tiny, meager, stupid fool in it. "Your arm, if it please your majesty," murmured one of the tailors, managing to give Jezal orders while remaining crushingly sycophantic. "Yes, of course, I'm sorry." Jezal raised his arm a little higher, inwardly cursing at having apologized yet again. He was a king now, as Bayaz was constantly telling him. If he had shoved one of the tailors out of the window, no apology would have been necessary. The man would probably have thanked him profusely for the attention as he plummeted to the ground. As it was, he merely gave a wooden smile and smoothly unraveled his measuring tape. His colleague was crawling below, doing something similar around Jezal's knees. The third was punctiliously recording their observations in a marbled ledger. Jezal took a long breath and frowned into the mirror. An uncertain-seeming young idiot with a scar on his chin gazed back at him from the glass, draped with swatches of glittering cloth, as though he were a tailor's dummy. He looked and certainly felt more like a clown than a king. He looked a joke, and undoubtedly would have laughed had he not himself been the ridiculous punchline. Perhaps something after the Austrian fashion, then. The royal jeweler placed another wooden nonsense carefully on Jezal's head and examined the results. It was far from an improvement. The damn thing looked like nothing so much as an inverted chandelier. "No, no," snapped Bayaz with some irritation. "Far too fancy, far too clever, far too big. He will scarcely be able to stand in the damn thing. It needs to be simple, to be honest, to be light. Something a man could fight in." The royal jeweler blinked. He will be fighting in the crown. No, dolt. But he must look as if he might. Bayaz came up behind Jezal, snatched the wooden contraption from his head and tossed it rattling on the polished floor. Then he seized Jezal by the arms and stared grimly at his reflection from over his shoulder. "This is a warrior king in the finest tradition, the natural heir to the kingdom of Harad the Great. A peerless swordsman who has dealt wounds and received them, who has led armies to victory, who has killed men by the score." "Score!" murmured Jezal, uncertainly. Bayaz ignored him. "A man as comfortable with saddle and sword as with throne and scepter. His crown must go with armor. It must go with weapons. It must go with steel. Now do you understand?" The jeweler nodded slowly. "I believe so, my lord." "Good. And one more thing. My lord has but to name it. Give it a big-arsed diamond." The jeweler humbly inclined his head. "That goes without saying. Now out. Out, all of you. His Majesty has affairs of state to attend to." The ledger was snapped shut. The tapes were rolled up in a moment. The swatches of cloth were whisked away. The tailors and the royal jeweler bowed their way backwards from the room with a range of servile mutterings, whisking the huge gilt-encrusted doors silently shut. Jezal had to stop himself from leaving with them. He kept forgetting that he was now His Majesty. Bayaz ushered him out into the great hallway outside, its walls covered in beautifully rendered maps of the Union. "You have business with your closed council." Jezal swallowed. The very name of the institution was daunting. Standing in marble chambers, being measured for new clothes, being called Your Majesty. All of this was bemusing, but hardly required a great effort on his part. Now he was expected to sit at the very heart of government. Jezal dan Luta, once widely celebrated for his towering ignorance, would be sharing a room with the 12 most powerful men in the Union. He would be expected to make decisions that would affect the lives of thousands, to hold his own in the arenas of politics and law and diplomacy, when his only areas of true expertise were fencing, drink, and women, and he was forced to concede that, in that last area at least, he did not seem to be quite the expert he had once reckoned himself. The closed council. His voice shot up to a register more girlish than kingly. and he was forced to clear his throat. "Is there some particular matter of importance?" he growled in an unconvincing bass. "Some momentous news arrived from the north earlier today." "It did. I am afraid that Lord Marshal Burr is dead. The army needs a new commander. Argument on that issue will probably take up a good few hours." "Down here, Your Majesty." "Hours," muttered Jezal, his boot heels clicking down a set of wide marble steps. "Hours in the company of the closed council." He rubbed his hands nervously together. Bayaz seemed to guess his thoughts. "There is no need for you to fear those old wolves. You are their master, whatever they may have come to believe. At any time you can replace them, or have them dragged away in irons for that matter, should you desire. Perhaps they have forgotten it. It might be that we will need to remind them in due course." They stepped through a tall gateway flanked by knights of the body, their helmets clasped under their arms, but their faces kept so carefully blank they might as well have had their visors down. A wide garden lay beyond, lined on all four sides by a shady colonnade, its white marble pillars carved in the likenesses of trees in leaf. Water splashed from fountains, sparkling in the bright sunlight. A pair of huge orange birds, with legs as thin as twigs, strutted self-importantly about a perfectly clipped lawn. They stared haughtily at Jezal down their curved beaks as he passed them, evidently in no more doubt than him that he was an utter impostor. He gazed at the bright flowers and the shimmering greenery and the fine statues. He stared up at the ancient walls, coated with red, white, and green creeper. Could it really be that all this belonged to him? All this, and the whole agrient besides? Was he walking now in the mighty footsteps of the kings of old, of Harad and Casimir and Arnaut? It boggled the mind. Jezal had to blink and shake his head, as he had 100 times already that day, simply to prevent himself from falling over. Was he not the same man as he had been last week? He rubbed at his beard, as if to check, and felt the scar beneath it. The same man who had been soaked out on the wide plain, who had been wounded among the stones, who had eaten half-cooked horse meat and been glad to get it. Jezal cleared his throat. "I would like very much. I don't know whether it would be possible to speak to my father." "Your father is dead," Jezal cursed silently to himself. "Of course he is. I meant the man I thought was my father. What is it that you suppose he would tell you? That he made bad decisions? That he had debts? That he took money from me in return for raising you?" "He took money?" muttered Jezal, feeling more forlorn than ever. Families rarely take in orphans out of goodwill, even those with a winning manner. "The debts were cleared, and more than cleared. I left instructions that you should have fencing lessons as soon as you could hold a steel, that you should have a commission in the king's own, and be encouraged to take part in the summer contest, that you should be well prepared in case this day should come. He carried out my instructions to the letter, but you can see that a meeting between the two of you would be an extremely awkward scene for you both. One best avoided." Jezal gave a ragged sigh. Of course, best avoided. An unpleasant thought crept across his mind. Is my name even Jezal? It is now that you have been crowned." Bayaz raised an eyebrow. "Why, would you prefer another?" No, of course not." He turned his head away and blinked back the tears. His old life had been a lie. His new one felt still more so. Even his own name was an invention. They walked in silence through the gardens for a moment, their feet crunching in the gravel, so fresh and perfect that Jezal wondered if every stone of it was daily cleaned by hand. "Lord Isher will make many representations to your Majesty over the coming weeks and months." "He will?" Jezal coughed and sniffed, and put on his bravest face. "Why?" "I promised him that his 2 brothers would be made Lords Chamberlain and Chancellor, on the closed council, that his family would be preferred above all others. That was the price of his support in the vote." "I see. Then I should honor the bargain." "Absolutely not," Jezal frowned. "I am not sure that upon achieving power, one should immediately distance oneself from all allies. They will feel they own your victory, and no rewards will ever satisfy them. You should elevate your enemies instead. They will gush over small tokens, knowing they do not deserve them. Hugin, Barazine, Scald, Mead, these are the men you should bring into your circle, not Brock. Never Brock. He came too close to wearing the crown to ever feel himself beneath it. Sooner or later he must be kicked back into his place. but not until you are safe in your position and have plentiful support." "I see." Jezal puffed out his cheeks. Evidently there was more to being king than fine clothes, a haughty manner, and always getting the biggest chair. "This way, out of the garden and into a shadowy hallway paneled with black wood, and lined with an array of antique arms to boggle the mind. Assorted suits of full armor stood to glittering attention. Plate and chainmail, hauberk and cuirass, all stamped and emblazoned with the golden sun of the Union. Ceremonial greetswords as tall as a man, and halberds considerably taller, were bolted to the wall in an elaborate procession. Under them were mounted an army's worth of axes, maces, morning stars, and blades, curved and straight, long and short, thick and thin. Weapons forged in the Union, weapons captured from the Gurkish, weapons stolen from Styrian dead on bloody battlefields. Victories and defeats commemorated in steel. High above, the flags of forgotten regiments, gloriously slaughtered to a man in the wars of long ago, hung tattered and lifeless from charred pikestaffs. A heavy double door loomed at the far end of this collection, black and unadorned, as inviting as a scaffold. Knights heralds stood on either side of it, solemn as executioners, winged helmets glittering. Men taxed not only with guarding the center of government, but with carrying the king's orders to whatever corner of the Union was necessary. His orders, Jezal realized with a sudden further lurch of nerves. "His Majesty seeks audience with the closed council," intoned Bayaz. The two men reached out and pulled the heavy doors open. An angry voice surged out into the corridor. "There must be further concessions, or there will only be further unrest. We cannot simply, High Justice, I believe we have a visitor." The White Chamber was something of a disappointment after the magnificence of the rest of the palace. It was not that large. There was no decoration on the plain white walls. The windows were narrow, almost cell-like, making the place seem gloomy even in the sunshine. There was no draught, and the air was uncomfortably close and stale. The only furniture was a long table of dark wood, piled high with papers, and 6 plain, hard chairs arranged down either side with another at the foot and one more, noticeably higher than the others, at the head. Jezal's own chair, he supposed. The closed council rose as he ducked reluctantly into the room. As frightening a selection of old men as could ever have been collected in one place, and every man of them staring right at Jezal in expectant silence. He jumped as the door was heaved shut behind him, the latch dropping with an unnerving finality. "Your Majesty," and Lord Chamberlain Hoff bowed deep. "May I and my colleagues first congratulate you on your well-deserved elevation to the throne. We all feel that we have in you a worthy replacement for King Goslav, and look forward to advising you and carrying out your orders over the coming months and years." He bowed again, and the collection of formidable old men clapped their hands in polite applause. "Why, thank you all," said Jezal, pleasantly surprised. However little he might feel like a worthy replacement for anything, perhaps this would not be so painful as he had feared. The old wolves seemed tame enough to him. "Please, allow me to make the introductions," murmured Hoff. "Archlector Salt, head of your Inquisition. An honor to serve, Your Majesty. High Justice Morovia, Chief Law Lord. Likewise, Your Majesty, an honor with Lord Marshal Varus. I believe you are already well acquainted. It was a privilege to train you in the past, Your Majesty, and will be a privilege to advise you now." So they went on, Jezal smiling and nodding to each man in turn. Halleck, the Lord Chancellor, Torlicorn, the High Consul, Reutzer, Lord Admiral of the Fleet, and so on and so on. Finally Hoff ushered him to the high chair at the head of the table, and Jezal enthroned himself while the closed council smiled on. He grinned gormlessly up at them for a moment, and then realized, "Oh, please be seated." The old men sat, a couple of them with evident winces of pain as old knees crunched and old backs clicked. Bayaz dropped carelessly into the chair at the foot of the table, opposite Jezal, as though he had been occupying it all his life. Robes rustled as old arses shifted on polished wood, and gradually the room went silent as a tomb. One chair was empty at Varus's elbow, the chair where Lord Marshal Burr would have sat, had he not been assigned to duty in the north, had he not been dead. A dozen daunting old men waited politely for Jezal to speak. A dozen old men who he had thought of until recently as occupying the pinnacle of power, all now answerable to him. a situation he could never have imagined in his most self-indulgent daydreams. He cleared his throat. "Pray continue, my lords. I will try and catch up as we go." Hoff flashed a humble smile. "Of course, your majesty. If at any time you require explanation, you have but to ask." "Thank you," said Jezal. "Thank." Halleck's grinding voice cut over him. "Back to the issue of discipline among the peasantry, therefore. We have already prepared concessions," snapped Salt. "Concessions which the peasants were happy to accept." "A shred of bandage to bind a suppurating wound," returned Morovia. "It is only a matter of time before rebellion comes again. The only way we can avoid it is by giving the common man what he needs, no more than is fair. We must involve him in the process of government." "Involve him," sneered Salt. "We must transfer the burden of tax to the landowners." Halleck's eyes rolled to the ceiling. "Not this nonsense again. Our current system has stood for centuries." barked Salt. "It has failed for centuries." "Threw back, Morovia." Jezal cleared his throat, and the heads of the old men snapped round to look at him. Could each man not simply be taxed the same proportion of his income, regardless of whether he is a peasant or a nobleman, and then— Perhaps he trailed off. It had seemed a simple enough idea to him, but now all 11 bureaucrats were staring at him, shocked, quite as if a domestic pet had been ill-advisedly allowed into the room, and it had suddenly decided to speak up on the subject of taxation. At the far end of the table, Bayaz silently examined his fingernails. There was no help there. "Ah, your majesty," ventured Torlicorm in soothing tones. "Such a system would be almost impossible to administer." And he blinked in a manner that said, "How do you manage to dress yourself, given your incredible ignorance?" Jezal flushed to the tips of his ears. "I see. The subject of taxation," droned Halleck, "is a stupendously complex one." And he gave Jezal a look that said, "It is far too complex a subject to fit inside your tiny fragment of a mind. It would perhaps be better, your majesty, if you were to leave the tedious details to your humble servants." Morovia had an understanding smile that said, "It would perhaps be better if you kept your mouth shut and avoided embarrassing the grown-ups, of course." Jezal retreated shamefacedly into his chair. Of course. And so it went on as the morning ground by, as the strips of light from the windows slunk slowly over the heaps of papers across the wide table. Gradually, Jezal began to work out the rules of this game, horribly complex, and yet horribly simple. The aging players were split roughly into 2 teams. Archlector Zult and High Justice Morovia were the captains, fighting viciously over every subject, no matter how small, each with 3 supporters who agreed with their every utterance. Lord Hoff, meanwhile, ineffectually assisted by Lord Marshal Burr, played the role of referee and struggled to build bridges across the unbridgeable divide between these 2 entrenched camps. Jezal's mistake had not been to think that he would not know what to say, though of course he did not. His mistake had been to think that anyone would want him to say anything. All they cared about was continuing their own profitless struggles. They had become used, perhaps, to conducting the affairs of state with a drooling half-wit at the head of the table. Jezal now realized that they saw in him a like-for-like trade. He began to wonder if they were right. "If your majesty could sign here, and here, and here, and there," the pen scratched against paper after paper. The old voices droned on, and held forth, and bickered one with the other. The grey men smiled, and sighed, and shook their heads indulgently whenever he spoke, and so he spoke less and less. They bullied him with praise and blinded him with explanation. They bound him up in meaningless hours of law and form and tradition. He sagged slowly, lower and lower into his uncomfortable chair. A servant brought wine, and he drank and became drunk and bored, and even more drunk and bored. Minute by stretched-out minute, Jezal began to realize there was nothing so indescribably dull, once you got down to the nuts and bolts of it, as ultimate power. "Now to a sad matter," observed Hoff, once the most recent argument had sputtered to a reluctant compromise. "Our colleague, Lord Marshal Burr, is dead. His body is on its way back to us from the north, and will be interred with full honors. In the meantime, however, it is our duty to recommend a replacement. the first chair to be filled in this room since the death of the esteemed Chancellor Ficht, Lord Marshal Burr. The old soldier cleared his throat, wincing as though he realized he was about to open a floodgate that might very well drown them all. There are two clear contenders for the post. Both are men of undoubted bravery and experience, whose merits are well known to this council. I have no doubt that either General Polder or General Croy would. There can be not the slightest doubt that Polder is the better man, snarled Salt, and Halleck immediately voiced his assent. On the contrary, hissed Morovia, two angry murmurs from his camp. Croy is transparently the better choice. It was an area in which, as an officer of some experience, Jezal felt he might have been of some minuscule value, but not one of the closed council seemed even to consider seeking his opinion. He sagged back sulkily into his chair, and took another slurp of wine from his goblet while the old wolves continued to snap viciously at one another. Perhaps we should discuss this matter at greater length later, cut in Lord Hoff over the increasingly acrimonious debate. His Majesty is growing fatigued with the fine points of the issue, and there is no particular urgency. Salt and Morovia glared at each other, but did not speak. Hoff gave a sigh of relief. Very well. Our next point of business relates to the supply of our army in England. Colonel West writes in his dispatches. West? Jezal sat up sharply, his voice rough with wine. The name was like smelling salts to a fainting girl. A solid and dependable rock to cling to in the midst of all this chaos. If only West had been there now, to help him through. Things would have made so much more sense. He blinked at the chair that Burr had left behind him, sitting empty at Vara's shoulder. Jezal was drunk, perhaps, but he was king. He cleared his wet throat. Colonel West shall be my new Lord Marshal. There was a stunned silence. The 12 old men stared. Then Torlicorm chuckled indulgently, in a manner that said, How will we shut him up, Your Majesty? Colonel West is known to you personally, and a brave man, of course. The entire council, it seemed, had finally found one issue on which they could all agree. First through the breach at Oryok and so on, muttered Varus, shaking his head. But really, he is junior and inexperienced, and he said Hoff, eyebrows raised. An unseemly break with tradition, lamented Halleck. Polder would be far superior, snarled Salt at Morovia. Croy is the man, Morovia barked back. Torlicorm gave a syrupy smile, of the kind a wet nurse might use while trying to calm a troublesome infant. So you see, Your Majesty, we cannot possibly consider Colonel West as Jezal's empty goblet bounced off Torlicorm's bald forehead with a loud crack and clattered away into the corner of the room. The old man gave a wail of shock and pain and slid from his chair, blood running from a long gash across his face. Cannot? Screamed Jezal on his feet, eyes starting from his head. You dare to give me fucking cannot, you old bastard? You belong to me, all of you. His fingers stabbed furiously at the air. You exist to advise me, not to dictate to me. I rule here, me. He snatched up the ink bottle and hurled it across the room. It burst apart against the wall, spraying a great black stain across the plaster, and spattering the arm of Archlector Salt's perfect white coat with black spots. Me, May. The tradition we need here is one of fucking obedience. He grabbed a sheaf of documents and flung them at Morovia, filling the air with fluttering paper. Never again give me cannot. Never. One set smiled, down at the very end of the table. That made him angrier than ever. Column West shall be my new Lord Marshal, he screeched, and kicked his chair over in a fury. At our next meeting, I will be treated with the proper respect, or I'll have the pack of you in chains. In fucking chains, and his head was hurting now rather badly. He had thrown everything within easy reach and was becoming desperately unsure of how to proceed. Bayaz rose sternly from his chair. My lords, that will be all for today. The closed council needed no further encouragement. Papers flapped, robes rustled, chairs squealed as they scrambled to be first out of the room. Hoff made it into the corridor. Morovia followed close behind, and Salt swept after him. Varus helped Torlicorm up from the floor and guided him by his elbow. I apologize. He was wheezing as he was hustled, bloody-faced, through the door, Your Majesty. I apologize profusely. Bayaz stood sternly at the end of the table, watching the councillors hurry from the room. Jezal lurked opposite, frozen somewhere between further anger and mortal embarrassment, but increasingly tending towards the latter. It seemed to take an age for the last member of the closed council to finally escape from the room, and for the great black doors to be dragged shut. The first of the Magi turned towards Jezal, and a broad smile broke suddenly out across his face. "Richly done, your majesty, richly done." "What?" Jezal had been sure that he had made an ass of himself to a degree from which he could never recover. "Your advisors will think twice before taking you lightly again, I think." "Not a new strategy, but no less effective for that. Herod the Great was himself possessed of a fearsome temper and made excellent use of it. After one of his tantrums, no one would dare to question his decisions for weeks." Bayaz chuckled. "Though I suspect that even Herod would have balked at dealing a wound to his own high consul." "That was no tantrum," snarled Jezal, his temper flickering up again. "If he was beset by horrible old men, then Bayaz was himself the worst culprit by far. If I am a king, I will be treated like one. I refuse to be dictated to in my own palace." "Not by anyone, not by I mean." Bayaz glared back at him, his green eyes frighteningly hard, and spoke with frosty calm. "If your intention is to lose your temper with me, your majesty, I would strongly advise against it." Jezal's rage had been on the very verge of fading already, and now, under the icy gaze of the Magus, it wilted away entirely. "Of course I'm sorry, I'm very sorry." He closed his eyes and stared numbly down at the polished tabletop. He never used to say sorry for anything. Now that he was a king, and needed to apologize to no man, he found he could not stop. "I did not ask for this," he muttered weakly, flopping down in his chair. "I don't know how it happened. I did nothing to deserve it." "Of course not." Bayaz came slowly around the table. "No man can ever deserve the throne. That is why you must strive to be worthy of it now. Every day, just as your great predecessors did. Casimir, Arnold, Herod himself." Jezal took a long breath and blew it out. "You're right, of course. How can you always be right?" Bayaz held up a humble hand. "Always right? Scarcely. But I have the benefit of long experience, and am here to guide you as best I can. You have made a fine start along a difficult road, and you should be proud as I am. There are certain steps we cannot delay, however. Chief among them is your wedding." Jezal gaped. "Wedding? An unmarried king is like a chair with 3 legs, your majesty. Apt to fall. Your rump has only just touched the throne, and it is far from settled there. You need a wife who brings you support, and you need heirs so that your subjects may feel secure. All that delay will bring is opportunities for your enemies to work against you." The blows fell so rapidly that Jezal had to grasp his head, hoping to stop it flying apart. "My enemies? Had he not always tried to get on with everyone? Can you be so naive? Lord Brock is doubtless already plotting against you. Lord Isha will not be put off indefinitely. Others on the Open Council supported you out of fear or were paid to do so." "Paid?" gasped Jezal. "Such support does not last forever. You must marry and your wife must bring you powerful allies. But I have—" Jezal licked his lips, uncertain of how to broach the subject. "Some commitments in that line. R.D. West." Jezal half opened his mouth to ask Bayaz how he knew so much about his romantic entanglements, but quickly thought better of it. The old man seemed to know far more about him than he did himself, after all. "I know how it is, Jezal. I have lived a long life. Of course you love her. Of course you would give up anything for her now. But that feeling, trust me, will not last." Jezal shifted his weight uncomfortably. He tried to picture R.D.'s uneven smile, the softness of her hair, the sound of her laugh, the way that had given him such comfort out on the plain, but it was hard to think of her now without remembering her teeth sinking into his lip, his face tingling from her slap, the sound of the table creaking back and forward underneath them, the shame and the guilt and the complexity. Bayaz's voice continued, mercilessly calm, brutally realistic, ruthlessly reasonable. "It is only natural that you made commitments, but your past life is gone, and your commitments have gone with it. You are a king now, and your people demand that you behave like one. They need something to look up to, something effortlessly higher than themselves. We are talking of the High Queen of the Union, a mother to kings, A farmer's daughter with a tendency towards unpredictable behavior and a penchant for heavy drinking? I think not. Jezal flinched to hear Artie described that way, but he could hardly argue the point. You are a natural son. A wife of unimpeachable breeding would lend your line far greater weight, far greater respect. There is a world full of eligible women, your majesty, all born to high station. Dukes' daughters and kings' sisters, beautiful and cultured. A world of princesses to choose from. Jezal felt his eyebrows rising. He loved R.D., of course, but Bayaz made a devastating argument. There was so much more to think of now than his own needs. If the idea of himself as a king was absurd, the idea of R.D. as a queen was triply so. He loved her, of course, in a way. But a world of princesses to choose from. That was a phrase it was decidedly hard to find fault with. You see it? The first of the Magi snapped his fingers in triumph. I will send to Duke Orso of Talons that his daughter Therese should be introduced to you. He held up a calming hand. Just to begin with, you understand. Talons would make a powerful ally. He smiled, then leaned forward to murmur in Jezal's ear. But you need not leave everything behind if you truly are attached to this girl. Kings often keep mistresses, you know. And that, of course, decided the matter. Chapter 19. Prepared for the worst. Glokta sat in his dining room, staring down at his table, rubbing at his aching thigh with one hand. His other stirred absently at the fortune and jewels spread out on the black leather case. Why do I do this? Why do I stay here and ask questions? I could be gone on the next tide, and no one any worse off. Perhaps a tour of the beautiful cities of Styria? A cruise round the Thousand Isles? Finally, to faraway Thund or distant Soljuk, to live out my twisted days in peace among people who do not understand a word I say. Hurting no one, keeping no secrets, caring no more for innocence or guilt, for truth or for lies, than do these little lumps of rock. The gems twinkled in the candlelight, clicking against each other, tickling at his fingers as he pushed them through one way and back the other. But His Eminence would weep and weep at my sudden disappearance. So one imagines would the banking house of Valent and Balk, where in all the wide circle of the world would I be safe from the tears of such powerful masters. And why? So I can sit on my crippled arse all the long day waiting for the killers to come? So I can lie in bed and ache and think about all that I have lost. He frowned down at the jewels, clean and hard and beautiful. I made my choices long ago, when I took Valent and Balk's money, when I kissed the ring of office, before the Emperor's prisons even, when I rode down to the bridge, sure that only magnificent sand Dan Glokta could save the world. A thumping knock echoed through the room, and Glokta jerked his head up, toothless mouth hanging open. As long as it is not the Archlector, open up, in the name of His Eminence. He grimaced at a spasm through his back as he dragged himself out of his chair, clawing the stones into a heap. Priceless, glittering handfuls of them. Sweat had broken out across his forehead. What if the Archlector were to discover my little treasure trove? He giggled to himself as he snatched at the leather case. I was going to mention all this. Really, I was. But the timing never seemed quite right. A small matter, after all, no more than a king's ransom. His fingers fumbled with the jewels, and in his haste he flicked one astray, and it dropped sparkling to the floor with a sharp click, click. Another knock, louder this time, the heavy lock shuddering from the force of it. Open up. I'm just coming. He forced himself down onto his hands and knees with a moan, casting about across the floor, his neck burning with pain. He saw it, a flat green one sitting on the boards, shining bright in the firelight. Got you, you bastard. He snatched it up, pulled himself to his feet by the edge of the table, folded up the case, once, twice. No time to hide it away. He shoved it inside his shirt, right down so it was behind his belt. Then he grabbed his cane and limped towards the front door, wiping his sweaty face, adjusting his clothes, doing his best to present an unruffled appearance. I'm coming. There's no need to. 4 huge practicals shoved past him into his apartments, almost knocking him over. Beyond them, in the corridor outside, stood His Eminence the Archlector, frowning balefully, 2 more vast practicals at his back. A surprising hour for such a gratifying visit. Glokta could hear the 4 men stomping around his apartments, throwing open doors, pulling open cupboards. "Never mind me, gentlemen. Make yourself at home." After a moment they marched back in. "Empty," grunted one, from behind his mask. "Ah," sneered Salt, moving smoothly over the threshold, staring about him with a scowl of contempt. "My new lodgings, it would seem, are scarcely more impressive than my old ones." His 6 practicals took up positions around the walls of Glokta's dining room, arms folded across their chests, watching. An awful lot of great big men to keep an eye on one little cripple. Salt's shoes stabbed at the floor as he strode up and down, his blue eyes bulging, a furious frown twisting his face. It does not take a masterful judge of character to see that he is not a happy man. Might one of my ugly secrets have come to his attention? One of my little disobediences? Glokta felt a sweaty trembling slink up his bent spine. The non-execution of Magister Eider, perhaps? My agreement with practical Vitari to tell less than the whole truth. The corner of the leather pouch dug gently into his ribs as he shifted his hips. Or merely the small matter of the large fortune, with which I was purchased by a highly suspect banking house. An image sprang unbidden into Glokta's mind, of the jewel case suddenly splitting behind his belt, gems spilling from his trouser legs in a priceless cascade, while the arch-lector and his practicals stared in amazement. I wonder how I'd try to explain that one. He had to stifle a giggle at the thought. "That bastard Bayaz," snarled Salt, his white-gloved hands curling into shaking fists. Glokta felt himself relax by the smallest hair. "I'm not the problem, then." "Not yet, at least." "Bayaz, that bald liar, that smirking impostor, that ancient charlatan. He has stolen the closed council. Stop, thief! He has that worm Luther dictating to us. You told me he was a spineless nothing." "I told you he used to be a spineless nothing, and you ignored me. This cursed puppy dog proves to have teeth, and is not afraid to use them. And that first of the bastard magi is holding his leash? He is laughing at us. He is laughing at me! At me!" screamed Salt, stabbing at his chest with a clawing finger. "I damn your excuses, Glokta. I am drowning in a sea of damned excuses, when what I need are answers. What I need are solutions. What I need is to know more about this liar. Then, perhaps, this will impress you. I have already, in fact, taken the liberty of some steps in that direction." "What steps?" "I was able to take his navigator into custody," said Glokta, allowing himself the smallest of smiles. "The navigator?" Zult gave no sign of being impressed. "And what did that star-gazing imbecile tell you?" Glokta paused. "That he journeyed across the old empire to the edge of the world with Bayaz and our new king, before his enthronement. He struggled for words that would fit cleanly into Salt's world of logic, and reasons, and neat explanations. That they were seeking for a relic of the old time." "Relics?" asked Salt, his frown deepening. "Old time?" Glokta swallowed. "Indeed, but they did not find it. So we now know one of 1,000 things that Bayaz did not do." "Ah!" Zult ripped angrily at the air with his hand. "He's nobody and told you less than nothing. More of your myths and rubbish." "Of course, your eminence," muttered Glokta. "There really is no pleasing some people." Salt frowned down at the squares board under the window, his white-gloved hand hovering over the pieces as if to make a move. "I lose track of how often you have failed me, but I will give you a final chance to redeem yourself. Look into this first of the Magi once more. Find some weakness, some weapon we can use against him. He is a disease, and we must burn him out." He prodded angrily at one of the white pieces. "I want him destroyed. I want him finished. I want him in the House of Questions, in chains." Glokta swallowed. "Your Eminence Bayaz is ensconced in the palace, and well beyond my reach his protégé is now our king, thanks in part to our own desperate efforts." Glokta almost winced, but he could not stop himself from asking the question. "How am I to do it?" "How?" shrieked Salt. "How, you crippled worm!" He swept his hand furiously across the board and dashed the pieces spinning across the floor. "And I wonder who will have to bend down to pick those up. The 6 practicals, as though controlled by the pitch of the archlector's voice, detached themselves from the walls and loomed menacingly into the room. If I wished to attend to every detail myself, I would have no need of your worthless services. Get out there and get it done, you twisted slime. Your Eminence is too kind, muttered Glokta, humbly inclining his head once more. But even the lowest dog needs a scratch behind the ears, from time to time, or he might go for his master's throat. And look into his story while you're about it. Story, Archlector, this fairy tale of Carmi Dan Roth. Salt's eyes went narrower still, hard creases cutting into the bridge of his nose. If we cannot take the leash ourselves, we must have the dog put down. Do you understand? Glokta felt his eye twitching. In spite of his efforts to make it be still, we find a way to bring King Jezal's reign to an abrupt end. Dangerous. If the Union is a ship, it has but lately come through a storm and is listing badly. We have lost one captain. Replace another now, and the boat might break apart entirely. We will all be swimming in some deep, cold, unknown waters then. Civil war. Anyone. He frowned down at the squares pieces scattered across his floor. But His Eminence has spoken. What is it that Shickle said? When your master gives you a task, you do your best at it, even if the task is a dark one, and some of us are only suited to dark tasks. Carmi Dan Roth and her bastard. I shall find the truth of it, Your Eminence. You can depend on me. Salt's sneer curled to even greater heights of contempt. If only the House of Questions was busy for an evening. Glokta saw no one as he limped down the corridor, his excuses for teeth pressed into his lip, his hand clenched tight around the handle of his cane, slippery with sweat. He saw no one, but he heard them. Voices bubbled from behind the iron-bound doors, low and insistent, asking the questions, high and desperate, spilling the answers. From time to time a shriek or a roar or a howl of pain would cut through the heavy silence. Those hardly need explaining. Severard was leaning against the dirty wall as Glokta limped towards him, one foot up on the plaster, whistling tunelessly behind his mask. "What's all this?" asked Glokta. "Some of Lord Brock's people got drunk, then they got noisy. 50 of 'em. Made quite a mess up near the Four Corners, moaning about rights, whining on how the people were cheated, mouthing off how Brock should been king. They say it was a demonstration. We say it was treason. Treason. The definition is notoriously flexible. Pick out some ringleaders and get some papers signed. England is back in Union hands. High time we started filling the place up with traitors. They're already at it. Anything else?" "Oh, of course. Juggling knives. One comes down, 2 go up. Always more blades spinning in the air, and each one with a deadly edge. I had a visit from His Eminence earlier today. A brief visit, but too long for my taste. Work for us? Nothing that will make you a rich man, if that's what you're hoping for. I'm always hoping. I'm what you call an optimist. Lucky for you, I rather tend the other way." Glokta took a deep breath and let it out in a long sigh. The first of the Magi and his bold companions. "Again?" "His Eminence wants information. This Bayaz, though. Isn't he tight with our new king?" Glokta raised an eyebrow as a muffled roar of pain echoed down the corridor. "Tight? He might as well have made him out of clay. That is why we must keep our eyes upon him. Practical Severard, for his own protection. Powerful men have powerful enemies, as well as powerful friends. Think that Navigator knows anything else? Nothing that will do the trick. Shame. I was getting used to having the little bastard around. He tells a hell of a story about a huge fish." Glokta sucked at his empty gums. "Keep him where he is for now. Perhaps Practical Frost will appreciate his tall tales. He has a fine sense of humor. If the Navigator's no use, who do we squeeze? Who indeed? 9 Fingers is gone. Bayaz himself is tucked up tight in the palace, and his apprentice hardly leaves his side. The erstwhile Jezal Dan Luther, we must concede, is now far beyond our reach. What about that woman?" Severard looked up. "What, that brown bitch? She's still in the city, isn't she? Last I heard. Follow her then, and find out what she's about." The Practical paused. "Do I have to? What? You scared?" Severard lifted up his mask and scratched underneath it. I can think of people I'd rather follow. Life is a series of things we would rather not do. Glokta looked up and down the corridor, making sure there was no one there. We also need to ask some questions about Carmi Dan Roth, supposed mother of our present king. What sort of questions? He leaned toward Severud and hissed quietly in his ear. Questions like, did she really bear a child before she died? Was that child really the issue of the overactive loins of King Goslav? Is that child truly the same man that we now have on the throne? You know, the kind of questions. Questions that could land us in a great deal of trouble. Questions that some people might call treason. After all, the definition is notoriously flexible. Severud's mask looked the same as ever, but the rest of his face was decidedly worried. You sure we want to go digging there? Why don't you ask the Archlector if he's sure? He sounded sure to me. Get Frost to help you if you're having trouble. But what are we looking for? How will we? How? Hissed Glokta. If I wished to attend to every detail myself, I would have no need of your services. Get out there and get it done. When Glokta had been young and beautiful, quick and promising, admired and envied, he had spent a great deal of time in the taverns of Adua, though I never remember falling this far, even in my darkest moods. He scarcely felt out of place now as he hobbled among the customers. To be crippled was the norm here, and he had more teeth than average. Nearly everyone carried unsightly scars or debilitating injuries, sores or warts to make a toad blush. There were men with faces rough as the skin on a bowl of old porridge, men who shook worse than leaves in a gale and stank of weak old piss, men who looked as if they'd slit a child's throat just to keep their knives sharp. A drunken whore slouched against a post in an attitude that could hardly have been arousing to the most desperate sailor. That same reek of sour beer and hopelessness, sour sweat and early death that I remember from the sights of my worst excesses, only stronger. There were some private booths at one end of the stinking common room, vaulted archways full of miserable shadows and even more miserable drunks. And who might one expect to find in such surroundings? Glokta shuffled to a stop beside the last of them. Well, I never thought I'd see you alive again. Nikomo Koska looked even worse than when Glokta first met him, if that was possible. He was spread out against the slimy wall, his hands dangling, his head hanging over to one side, his eyes scarcely open as he watched Glokta work his painful way into a chair opposite. His skin was soapy pale in the flickering light from the single mean candle flame. Dark pouches under his eyes, dark shadows shifting over his pinched and pointed face. The rash on his neck had grown angrier and spread up the side of his jaw like ivy up a ruin. With just a little more effort he might look nearly as ill as me. Superior Glokta, he wheezed, in a voice as rough as tree bark. I am delighted that you received my message. What an honor to renew our acquaintance, against all the odds. Your masters did not reward your efforts in the south with a cutthroat, eh? I was as surprised as you are, but no, though there is still ample time. How was Dagoska after I left? The Styrian puffed out his hollow cheeks. Dagoska was a real mess, since you are asking. A lot of men dead. A lot of men made slaves. That's what happens when the Gurkish come to dinner, eh? Good men with bad endings, and the bad men did little better. Bad endings for everyone. Your friend General Visbruck got one of them. I understand he cut his own throat. To rapturous approval from the public. How did you get away? The corner of Koska's mouth curled up, as though he would have liked to smile but had not the energy. I disguised myself as a servant girl, and I fucked my way out. Ingenious. But far more likely you were the one who opened the gates to the Gurkish in return for your freedom. I wonder if I would have done the same in that position. Probably. And lucky for us both, they say that luck is a woman. She's drawn to those that least deserve her. Perhaps so, though I appear to be both undeserving and unlucky. It is certainly fortunate that you should appear in Adua at this moment. Things are unsettled. Glokta heard a squeaking, rustling sound, and a large rat dashed out from under his chair, and paused for a moment in full view. Koska delved a clumsy hand into his stained jacket, and whipped it out. A throwing knife flew out with it, flashed through the air. It shuddered into the boards a good stride or two wide of the mark. The rat sat there for a moment longer, as though to communicate its contempt, then scurried away between the table and chair legs, the scuffed boots of the patrons. Dagoska sucked at his stained teeth as he slithered from the booth to retrieve his blade. I used to be dazzling with a throwing knife, you know. Beautiful women used to hang from my every word. Glokta sucked at his own empty gums. Times change, so I hear. All kinds of changes. New rulers mean new worries. Worries mean business for people in my trade. It might be that I will have a use for your particular talents before too long. I cannot say that I would turn you down. Dagoska tipped his bottle up and stuck his tongue into the neck, licking out the last trickle. My purse is empty as a dry well. So empty, in fact, that I don't even have a purse. There, at least I am able to assist. Glokta checked that they were not observed, then tossed something across the rough tabletop and watched it bounce with a click and a spin to a halt in front of Dagoska. The mercenary picked it up between finger and thumb, held it to the candle flame, and stared at it through one bloodshot eye. This seems to be a diamond. Consider yourself on retainer. I dare say you could find some like-minded men to assist you, some reliable men who tell no tales and ask no questions. Some good men to help out? Some bad men, do you mean? Glokta grinned, displaying the gaps in his teeth. Well, I suppose that all depends on whether you're the employer or you're the job. I suppose it does at that. Dagoska let his empty bottle drop to the ill-formed floorboards. And what is the job, superior? For now, just to wait and stay out of sight. He leaned from the booth with a wince and snapped his fingers at a surly serving girl. Another bottle of what my friend is drinking. And later, I'm sure I can find something for you to do. He shuffled painfully forward in his chair to whisper. Between you and me, I heard a rumor that the Gurkish are coming. Dagoska winced. Them again? Must we? Those bastards don't play by the rules. God, and righteousness, and belief. He shuddered. Makes me nervous. Well, whoever it is banging on the door, I'm sure I can organize a heroic last stand against the odds without hope of relief. I am not lacking for enemies, after all. The mercenary's eyes glinted as the girl thumped a full bottle down on the warped table before him. Ah, lost causes. My favorite. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.